All right, well, good morning, everyone. It is 8:30, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Maria Marlin, and I'm the outreach specialist for the Washington Invasive Species Council. And I first wanted to thank you so much for attending this first of its kind Urban Forest Pest Virtual Summit. Now, this is a collaborative effort between the Washington Invasive Species Council and the Washington Department of Natural Resources. Namely the Urban and Community Forestry Program with funding from the United States Forest Service. And I want to give a huge shout out to three awesome ladies from the Department of Natural Resources. And those three are Daria Goshtala, M. Roberts, and Rachel Santaolalla. These three ladies were instrumental in the planning and execution of this entire event. Em and Daria are here today, and they're going to be helping to run the webinar and monitor the Q&A. And also, if you're here seeking credits from the ISA or the SAF, you have them to thank for this opportunity. They really did the heavy lifting on that front. So thank you, you three. And now, speaking of that, I firstly wanted to go over some quick housekeeping things. All right, firstly, the summit is going to be recorded. Recordings are going to be uploaded to YouTube, and then I will email them out to everyone who has registered on Zoom. So if you register on Zoom, you will get an email with the recording. As we go through the presentations, please put any questions for the speakers into the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar. You'll find it there at the bottom. We did enable the chat, but that's really only for technical difficulties. So any questions, please put in the Q&A. If you lose connection to the webinar, just use that same link to rejoin. And it is the exact same link for tomorrow's session. So just use that same link. There's not going to be a new link. All right. If you are seeking continuing education units from the International Society of Arboriculture or the Society of American Foresters, we have some instructions for you. So you have to stay for the entire time in order to receive those credits. And at the end of each day, we're going to be sharing a survey that you have to fill out in order to receive credits. It's going to be a different survey each day. So this is super important. If you're attending both days, you have to fill it out both days because they're going to be different. So just because you do it today doesn't mean you're free tomorrow. And unfortunately, we do not have credits from the Washington State Department of Agriculture. We didn't apply this time around, but we did receive several questions. So I'm sorry about that, and I will apply next time for them. All right, now I'm thrilled to turn it over to Stephanie Helms, the Executive Coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council, for some opening comments.
Great, thanks so much, Maria. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for an exciting and informative lineup of presentations for the first ever Urban Forest Pest Virtual Summit. Our diverse tree canopy statewide, both in urban settings and vast forests, is one of our many pride and joys here in Washington State. And as more of us reside in cities, and as those cities continue to grow, we need to protect and grow our urban tree canopy for the innumerable ecological and sociological benefits they provide. Unfortunately, climate change and secondary effects to climate change make preserving our tree canopy difficult. And invasive pests, whether here, closer on the horizon, are some of the biggest threats to our urban tree canopy that already cost local governments an estimated $1.7 billion in dead tree removal costs nationwide every year. We know that prevention is the most effective method in protecting our trees against harmful invasive pests. But when prevention is impossible, we have to be prepared to respond to a pest to minimize the impact to our urban forests and keep invasive species from spreading to our natural lands that we depend on and recreate in. This summit will give us an opportunity to learn and share ideas so that we can be prepared to address these challenges. I hope you all find this summit valuable, informative, and inspiring, as well as an opportunity to network with other urban forestry professionals across Washington State. Together, we can protect our forests from invasive species. Thank you all so much again. Looking forward to the next 2 days, and I'll hand this back over to Maria. Thanks again.
All right, great. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, before we get started, I'm going to launch a poll. It is very quick, just a few questions. And these questions are going to ask you to rate your knowledge on certain topics right now at this very point in time. And at the end of today, you're going to see those questions again, and we will ask you again to rate your knowledge. And we're just trying to gauge your learning and understanding of these topics that you're going to hear more about today. So you should see the poll on your screen. So just take a few minutes to please fill that out. All right, halfway there. Oh, we're at 50 out of 110 people. Okay. Wow, we have almost 100% participation. That never happens. So thank you, everyone. I'll leave open for a couple more seconds. All right, 83% participation. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We'll end that. All right, and it's time to introduce our first speaker of the day. So first up, we have Evan Elderbrock, and he's with the Oregon Department of Forestry. And he's going to be talking about the emerald ash borer and efforts in Oregon surrounding this pest. So I will let you take it away, Evan.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Maria. Now the fateful test.
All right, we got this.
All right, let's give this a go. You seeing a nice full screen, hopefully?
Yeah.
All right.
Wonderful.
Well, hello, everyone, and many thanks to the Washington DNR and Washington Invasive Species Council for inviting me to speak with you all today. My name is Evan Elderbrock, and I'm an emerald ash borer support specialist in the Urban and Community Forestry Program at Oregon Department of Forestry. And I'm excited to present this presentation with you all today. I'm titling Confronting the Green Menace, Planning for Emerald Ash Borer in the Pacific Northwest. In this presentation, I'll introduce emerald ash borer and its history in the United States, explain how Oregon has prepared for and responded to EAB, and outline some of the best management practices to minimize the social, environmental, and economic impacts of EAB in our communities. All right, so let's dive in. The emerald ash borer, or EAB, is an invasive and highly destructive wood-boring beetle that kills ash trees and has also been found to infest white fringe tree and cultivated olive. Unfortunately, all species of ash native to North America are susceptible to EAB. Conservatively, EAB has killed over 100 million ash trees across the United States in the last 20 years and is projected to kill 135 million urban ash trees between 20 and 2050, corresponding to an annual cost of about $1.8 billion. Most unfortunately, there is no known eradication option for EAB. If you hear nothing else today, please hear this. Though we cannot stop the spread of EAB, we can work together to slow the spread, buying critical time for developing management strategies and planning. The EAB larvae are actually what do all the damage. The adults lay their eggs on the bark of the ash trees, and when the larvae hatch, they burrow beneath the bark and feed on the phloem of the tree. Eventually, once the larval population pressure is high enough, they will girdle and kill trees by cutting off the supply of water and nutrients to the canopy. Let's take a look at how EAB has spread across the United States using 5-year time increments, with an eye towards what we might expect the spread to look like in the Pacific Northwest. EAB was first detected in the Detroit area of Michigan in 2002. By 2007, EAB had spread throughout nearly the entire state of Michigan and to several other states throughout the Midwest. Here's the extent as of 2012 and 2017. In 2022, EAB had spread to 36 states and was detected in Forest Grove, Oregon, just 15 to 20 miles west of Portland, and the first known detection on the West Coast. So, two big questions. First, rhetorically, based on what we know about the spread of EAB across the country, what can we expect to happen in the Pacific Northwest? And second, why do we even care? What do we stand to lose in the Pacific Northwest? Well, to begin with, ash trees are common in natural areas throughout the Pacific Northwest, particularly west of the Cascades in riparian and wetland ecosystems. In fact, ash trees are often found in monotypic stands in wetland areas known as ash forest wetlands. These native ash trees provide critical ecosystem services, including shading and bank stabilization, which are essential to controlling water quality of streams and rivers. In addition, ash trees create habitat for several threatened and endangered species throughout the states. Ash trees are also very commonly planted in urban areas, along streets, in parks, and on private property, providing a multitude of benefits from shade and aesthetics to stormwater retention and air pollution removal. So, what does the timeline of an EAB infestation look like? In reality, it depends on the localized EAB population pressure, but here's more or less what you might expect to see over time. To start off, we have a healthy ash tree that is not infested with EAB. In the first year of the infestation, let's say one adult lays its eggs on the tree. Those larvae will hatch, burrow under the bark, and begin to feed on the cambium layer of the tree. The tree will still have a healthy looking canopy, and you will likely see no signs of EAB at this point. Each year, the EAB population pressure will increase exponentially. However, by the second year of the infestation, you are still unlikely to see obvious signs or symptoms of EAB because the population will still be relatively low. The tree will likely still have a healthy canopy, though if you are looking closely, you may start to notice some bark splits or signs of woodpecker activity. Typically, by year 3, we may start to see signs of canopy decline. You may notice sections of the canopy that appear to be in significant decline, and you may also see other clear signs of EAB on the tree. By year 4, the EAB population pressure is so high that you will see significant canopy dieback. In addition to significant canopy decline, if you peel back the bark, you will likely see extensive larval galleries throughout the tree. And by year 5, the tree will likely be nearly or completely dead. Once they have depleted their food source in the tree, most of the adult beetles will fly to new trees to lay their eggs. At this point, you will see clear evidence of EAB and little to no live canopy. So, what does an EAB infestation look like at the community scale? We see a similar trend as we did at the tree scale, where ash mortality starts slowly but increases exponentially. In the first 3 to 5 years of the infestation, you will likely not see too many dead ash trees as EAB populations remain low community-wide. As the EAB population grows exponentially, ash mortality likewise increases rapidly. By years 6 through 10 of the infestation, it is not uncommon for 20% or more of the ash trees in the community to die each year. Depending on the ash population in the community, this may very well outpace the community's ability to deal with the dead and dying trees, leaving you with many standing dead trees that pose significant safety risks. So why do we actually care? We can move past for a moment the social and ecological benefits that would be lost and think purely in terms of economic terms. And I'm going to just get my little laser pointer here, see if this is helpful. Looking at expenditures from cities across the country that have dealt with EAB, what we see is a steep increase in municipal forest budgets, particularly when EAB is at its peak. On average, cities have spent 3 times more at the peak of an EAB infestation than during their normal operating conditions. At its most basic, EAB will be costly, but when thinking about preparing and responding to EAB, one of the main goals is to help flatten out this cost curve, in addition to minimizing the safety risks to your community and maximizing ecosystem services. So just for a quick recap from this introductory section, ash trees are important to urban and natural ecosystems in the Pacific Northwest, providing a variety of benefits to people and nature alike. 2, EAB has killed hundreds of millions of ash trees across the United States and was confirmed in Oregon in 2022. Canopy decline, both at the tree scale and ash mortality at the community scale, start slowly but increase rapidly. And finally, we won't be able to stop EAB, but we can work to slow the spread and minimize the costs at peak infestation when costs are generally highest. Now I'm going to switch gears and spend a few minutes discussing how Oregon prepared for EAB and what steps the state has taken since EAB was detected in 2022. First, I just want to note that Oregon has been planning for the arrival of EAB well before it was detected in the state. Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Department of Agriculture published the EAB Readiness and Response Plan for Oregon in 2018 with support from numerous local and other state agencies. The plan was then revised again in 2021. One important piece of the plan was identifying what areas throughout the state were at highest risk for EAB. This map shows the relative risk to EAB across the state, with the highest concentration of risk on the west side of the Cascades throughout the Willamette Valley and in some areas along the coast as well. This map only considers natural areas and does not take into account the risk to urban areas. As ash can tolerate a wide variety of conditions, it is commonly planted in urban areas throughout the state, including in cities and towns east of the Cascades. The Department of Forestry staff set about collecting seeds from Oregon ash throughout the state from 2019 to 2022 to preserve genetic diversity found across the state. And unfortunately, in 2022, EAB was detected in Forest Grove in June by a parent picking up their kid from summer camp. Fun fact about the value of education and training. This parent went through a volunteer training course with Oregon State University Extension called Oregon Pest Detectors, highlighting that community education and training can really pay off for early detection. Shortly thereafter, Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Department of Agriculture entomologists confirmed that this was indeed EAB. The next course of action was for the Oregon Department of Agriculture to issue a quarantine in Washington County, restricting the movement of all ash, olive, and white fringe tree material out of the county. To move any ash, olive, or white fringe material out of the county requires one of several different treatment options, such as chipping to less than 1 inch, or heat treatment to an internal temperature of 170 degrees for 60 minutes, as well as a compliance agreement with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Lastly, as the adult beetles are generally flying between May and September, Oregon Department of Agriculture strongly urges tree removal and pruning to take place from October to April to minimize the spread of EAB. In addition to the quarantine in Washington County, Oregon established a statewide EAB task force headed by Oregon Department of Agriculture with Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon State University as primary agency partners. The task force is made up of representatives from a broad coalition of local, state, and federal agencies and holds monthly meetings. The EAB task force is divided into 7 different subcommittees. The Survey and Monitoring Subcommittee is generally responsible for assessing the existing extent of EAB in Oregon and setting up systems to monitor the spread of EAB over time. The Communications Subcommittee is charged with developing messaging and outreach related to EAB and releases monthly bulletins to provide updates and share stories related to EAB. The Training and Technical Assistance Subcommittee, headed by Oregon State University Extension, is set up to provide training and technical support to communities to establish local monitoring and planning efforts. The Integrated Pest Management Subcommittee has been working to develop best management practices for both natural and urban areas. With EAB, wood waste has been a significant challenge for communities, and the Wood Waste and Wood Utilization Subcommittee has been working to develop systems and networks for managing wood waste for its best and highest use. The Research Subcommittee has been working to coordinate studies related to EAB-resistant ash genetics and the susceptibility of cultivated olive, which could be a major agricultural concern, particularly for California. And finally, the Funding Subcommittee, headed by the U.S. Forest Service, has been helping identify funding sources to support the statewide EAB response effort. So what's the latest news on the ground? Oregon Department of Agriculture, for the last year and a half almost, has been surveying ash trees within 15 miles of the initial EAB detection to identify the extent of the infestation. So far, the good news is that positive detections have only been found within a 5.7-mile area surrounding the initial detection site in the Forest Grove and Cornelius area. We've also been coordinating with local, state, and federal agencies to set up traps throughout the state. EAB traps are not the most effective and can produce false negatives, but have also been helpful for early detection. This year, none of the 140 traps placed throughout the state caught any EAB. The Oregon Invasive Species Hotline is the primary way in which people can report suspected EAB in Oregon. And based on reports since July of 2022, we've had 299 reports that were negative for EAB and 10 reports that were positive. So this demonstrates the efficacy of this hotline. And importantly, all the positive reports were found in the Forest Grove area only. So let's just review Oregon's response so far. Oregon began planning for EAB well before EAB was detected. And after initial EAB detection, Oregon Department of Agriculture issued a quarantine and a task force was established to coordinate the statewide response. And the EAB task force is working to understand the current extent of the EAB infestation, slow the spread of EAB, and support communities with EAB planning. All right, now it's time for the fun stuff. Although EAB will invariably have a massive impact on our urban forests, we are fortunate to have 20 years of research and experience from the Midwest to draw upon. Here's an overview of some important considerations in preparation for EAB infestation that we will discuss today. We're going to start with the public education piece. Much like with managing wildfire, everyone has a role to play in helping slow the spread of EAB. Think back to that map of EAB in the United States. Since EAB can only fly up to 10 miles per year, how did EAB jump all the way from Colorado to Oregon? It turns out that the primary vector for the spread of EAB is the transport of firewood. We are trying to spread the message far and wide. Don't move firewood. Please buy or collect firewood close to where you intend to burn it, and the closer the better. In addition, it's time to stop planting ash trees in the Pacific Northwest until we have cultivars that are EAB resistant, which is being worked on currently. As ash trees will inevitably get infested with EAB, it's better to plant trees that have a higher probability of surviving long-term. So as arborists, urban forests, or natural area managers, what can we do to slow the spread of EAB and minimize impacts to our communities? First, remove all fraxinous species from approved tree lists and work to solidify this change in your municipal code. I don't have time to get into it right now, but there's some horror stories from the Midwest about failures to update code and ash trees getting planted widely in subdevelopments. So just a word of caution, if you want to talk to the urban forester from Des Moines, you can reach out to him. Probably many of you all on the call know how to ID ash trees, but it never hurts for a tune-up on your skills. Fortunately, ash trees have some features that distinguish them pretty readily from other trees. The combination of the pinnately compound leaves and opposite branching is fairly unique to ash trees. And once you have a handle on which trees are ash, it's time to learn the signs and symptoms of EAB. A common symptom of EAB is canopy decline. However, canopy decline can also be a symptom of stress from drought or other pathogens such as verticillium wilt, so you will need to be on the lookout for other signs and symptoms as well. Epicormic sprouting, or shoots coming off the base or trunk of the tree, is another symptom of EAB, though again, this is a common stress response that could be due to other factors such as heat or drought. Woodpeckers are happy to predate on EAB larvae, and as such, woodpecker activity is a common sign of EAB. You may notice some of the outer bark being flecked off of infested ash trees, which can reveal some areas with a distinctly reddish colored layer. You may also see woodpecker holes where the woodpeckers have drilled in to find EAB larvae. A very common symptom of an infested ash tree is the presence of bark splits, which happens immediately on top of underlying larval galleries. Sometimes you will be able to see the larval galleries just beneath the bark split. If you look carefully at this image, you can see that larval gallery underneath the bark split there. You may eventually see exposed larval galleries, but often you will only see larval galleries if you remove the outermost layer of bark. And finally, one of the most distinctive signs of EAB is the D-shaped exit holes that the adult beetles emerge from. For those of you who have worked on birch trees infested with bronze birch borer, these D-shaped exit holes may look very familiar, as the bronze birch borer is a close relative of EAB. So what should you do if you suspect a tree is infested with EAB? In Oregon, report it to the Invasive Species Hotline, and in Washington, report it to the Washington Invasive Species Council. Outside of Washington and Oregon, you can report to APHIS online or by calling on the phone. Arguably, this next section could be lumped under field operations, but I wanted to separate it out because I think it is that important. To the urban foresters in the room, this may feel like preaching to the choir, but I would not be doing my job if I didn't stress the importance of tree inventory. There are many reasons to conduct a tree inventory, but principal among them are that trees are both critical assets and potential liabilities for your community. Without knowing what you have, you really can't begin to manage these assets and liabilities to the best of your ability. A tree inventory allows you to record where trees are located in your community, as well as their size, species, condition, context, and various other considerations. There are many different types of tree inventory. You can conduct a complete inventory of all street trees and park trees, or you could conduct a sample inventory of just ash trees, for example. When conducting inventory of ash trees, it will be important to identify trees at least to genus. You should also collect information on the tree's size. Specifically, knowing the diameter at breast height will be important to determining whether the tree is a candidate for treatment. Additionally, you will want to note the condition of the tree, paying particular attention to canopy decline. And considering the timeline of EAB infestation, it is critical to regularly revisit and update your tree inventory. Now that you know how many ash trees you have and you know their size and condition, it's time to think about the potential management options. And finally, for some good news, there's an incredibly effective treatment option that can protect ash trees from EAB infestation. Over the 20 years of research and field experience, several treatment options have made it to the market, and we now have the tools at our disposal to protect ash trees from EAB. So should we go about treating every ash tree? Definitely not, but we can protect many of these ash trees in our community, either for their entire lifespan or to support phased removal and replacement of ash at a reasonable rate throughout your community. So what are the primary considerations in whether an ash tree should be treated? First, size is a critical consideration. The consensus treatment option is only approved for use on trees 6 inches DBH and larger. So we'll be focusing treatment as an option for only those medium to large trees. Condition is also important. Is it also an important treatment consideration? Generally, it is not advised to treat trees with greater than 50% canopy decline. Depending on your capacity for treatment, you will want to prioritize the best condition ash trees. Context is also incredibly important. Prioritizing treatment in low canopy neighborhoods protects critical assets in communities already receiving the least tree benefits. Additionally, prioritizing treatment in low-income neighborhoods protects trees from communities that may not be able to financially support treatment on their own. Another consideration might be the density of ash trees. It is not uncommon to see a line of ash trees along a street, and without treatment, the street would go from forest to desert. In this context, not every tree has to be treated, or at least not indefinitely, but treating and then replanting in phases allows for a more diverse canopy structure while preserving the existing forested character. As I mentioned, there are several treatment options available, but emamectin benzoate has been identified as the consensus choice through extensive academic research and municipal trial and error. Trees should be treated every 2 years, but if you are treating at the community scale and can tolerate losing a few trees, you might consider treating every 3 years to save costs and application time. Emamectin benzoate is applied through a systemic trunk injection system, and the beauty of this system is that it dramatically reduces the impact to non-target species compared to sprays or soil drenches. Additionally, since ash is wind pollinized, ash pollen only makes up a small portion of pollinator forage, and studies have found that if treatment takes place in the spring after leaf set, the pollen in the following year will not be toxic to pollinators. I should mention that treatment is not advised until EAB has been detected close to or in your community, but you can start identifying good candidates for treatment now. Also, it's important to note that in Oregon, emamectin benzoate must be applied by a licensed pesticide applicator. Another important tool in the EAB management tool belt is tree removal and replacement. When thinking about removal and replacement, the first step is to decide whether the tree in question should be removed preemptively, that is prior to infestation, or reactively after the tree has been infested. There are several important considerations when choosing between preemptive and reactive removal, first of which is condition. Adult beetles may lay their eggs on any ash tree, but they are more likely to lay eggs on stressed trees. As such, prioritizing the poorest condition ash trees for preemptive removal will reduce the number of preferred host trees. If good condition trees are not going to be treated, they should be considered candidates for reactive removal and should be monitored regularly for early signs of EAB infestation. Size is another important consideration when deciding between preemptive and reactive removal. Large trees provide more ecosystem services than small trees, so large trees in good condition should be great candidates for reactive removal if not being treated to maximize the benefits provided by the tree. Small dead trees are less likely to create serious safety risks than large dead trees, so they may not be as high a priority for preemptive removal as those large, poor condition trees that could pose risk to life or property. The context of the tree is also important in the decision about when to remove a tree. Dead ash trees are incredibly brittle, and ash trees that have more than 30% canopy decline are considered unsafe for arborists to climb. If a tree is in a location where it would be inaccessible for a bucket truck and would need a crane to remove, it may be a consideration for preemptive removal given the potential for added costs. I will also say that trees in tricky contexts may be good candidates for treatment. So that's an alternative consideration here. I'm not going to go too deeply into selecting replacement species after ash removal, but I do want to express the need to learn from the past. When Dutch elm disease swept across the US, killing a vast majority of elm trees and leaving rows of standing dead trees in its wake, what did the replanting effort look like? Well, many of those elms were replanted with green ash, which was known as an incredibly hardy, versatile tree with no known pests. Unfortunately, now many of those green ash trees are being killed by EAB or have been already. So let's not make the same mistake of the past. Instead, when ash trees are removed, let's replant ash with a diverse mix of trees to increase the resiliency of our urban forests. Now, let's take a quick look at a financial planning example from the city of Portland. Again, at the municipal scale, one of the main goals in managing for EAB is to reduce the overall costs, particularly when costs are projected to be at their peak. So in this example from the city of Portland, they looked at the base case where the city of Portland estimated that to remove and replace all their ash trees would cost upwards of $16 million. By comparison, when bringing in treatment into the equation, Portland found that by treating ash trees in fair condition or better, with greater than 8-inch DBH, the city could save more than $10 million over a 10-year period. And looking at when costs were projected to occur, the management plan that includes both treatment and removal and replacement saved a vast majority of the costs during the period when costs were highest, saving nearly $10 million during the 5-year peak cost period. Finally, it's important to mention that these cost-saving measures do not even consider the preservation of all the ecosystem services provided by the treated ash trees, including the benefits provided by the trees that are treated in the cost-benefit analysis. We see a nearly $10 million difference in ecosystem service value when comparing to the base removal and replacement plan. All right, finally, let's talk a little bit about wood waste and wood utilization. For many cities throughout the Midwest, dealing with the wood from EAB infested trees was one of the most challenging problems they faced. I don't have any specific answers for you, but I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder about wood waste. First, where does wood waste in your community go? Does it get chipped into a pile, go somewhere into a pile? Do logs go to a marshaling yard, or does it just get hauled to the dump? Secondly, what's the best available use for this wood? Can you produce furniture grade lumber or biochar, which are probably the best two options from a carbon capture perspective? Or is there an opportunity to make firewood or wood chips, which is still a lot better than hauling wood material to the dump? Finally, what is the network of companies or organizations involved in wood utilization in your community? By building up this network now, you will be able to support local industries while also reducing the burden that your community faces when EAB hits. All right, at this point, we've made it through the EAB management checklist, so let's just do a brief recap. First, if you hear nothing else, arborists and urban foresters play key roles in monitoring for EAB and slowing its spread. Secondly, conducting a tree inventory and regularly monitoring ash trees are critical to making decisions about treatment, timings of removals. Thirdly, we are very fortunate that there's a well-researched, highly effective, and targeted treatment option to protect ash trees from EAB. The benefit from large canopy trees won't be replaced by a newly planted tree for 30, 40, or 50 plus years. You can use treatment to protect ash tree canopy in your community, as well as buy time for phased removal and replacement at a sustainable pace. When you do choose to remove and replace ash trees, please don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Let's replant ash trees with a diverse mix of species to promote an urban forest that is resilient to pests and climate change. And lastly, this is our opportunity to plan for the succession of ash trees to a more diverse and resilient urban forest in the future. So let's use all the tools in our tool belt, combining treatment with removal and replacement to help lower costs while maximizing ecological benefits. And at this point, I'm happy to pause and take some time for any questions you have. I will note that I have a list of EAB resources. They're all linked here, so I can share this with the hosts and they can share it out, or you can feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to share resources with anyone who's looking for information.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan.
Yeah.
We do have some questions for you in the Q&A, so I will read them out in the order that that they were submitted.
Okay.
The first one is asking, what time of year are the larvae active?
Great question. Larvae are active pretty much year round though. Here, let me I have like about 1 million extra slides after, so I can show you. Essentially, larvae are mostly active throughout the year, but they will go into this pre-pupal form over winter. So they're not really active during winter generally, though, and they generally have a 1-year life cycle, though when food supply isn't ideal or when temperatures are extremely cold, they may exhibit multi-year life cycles. And in Oregon, because it's such an early infestation, population pressures are so low, they've seen some evidence that that EAB are exhibiting a multi-year life cycle. So larvae are active actually throughout the winter. They don't go into that pre-pupal state. But yeah, and then they become pupa in the spring.
Great, thank you. Where do larvae burrow? Old bark, young branches, or both?
That is also a great question. They burrow throughout the tree. They generally start laying the eggs up towards the top of the canopy and move down. But you will, in severely infested trees, you will see, let's see if I can, what I can get to here. In like this tree over here, you know, this is a severely infested tree. These larvae have come all the way down to the base of the tree and fully girdled it down here. But they will start up at the top. So arborists generally are out on branches and stuff. So arborists can kind of be the first line of defense. If you're up in a tree, you start to see bark splits, things like that might be an indicator.
Right. What is a good source to identify Asian ash species that are resistant to EAB?
I don't really have a great answer for that. I believe there aren't a lot of those species in the Midwest where most EAB has come through, and the complicated factor is, you know, part of it is about genetics of the Manchurian ash, maybe a little bit more resistant, but then also like the ecological community that EAB comes from also has other predators like several of these different stingless wasps that help control the EAB population. So I think it's a combination of invasive species in an environment that has not enough predation, and then also some genetics that are a little bit resistant. So I don't really have a good answer for you on that front about EAB resistant ash, though I do know that some of the genetic work that's being done on green ash, they've been able to develop a cultivar that's 60 or 70% resistant to EAB or something like that. So they're making progress, and they're going to be starting to work on Oregon ash here soon as well.
All right. Next question. How does a trap create a false negative?
So a false negative is basically when you have EAB, but it doesn't get caught in the trap. So that can happen. It happens quite often, I think, just because the traps don't have there's no like pheromone lure that's particularly attractive to EAB. They use a phenol lure that I think is mildly effective, but it can happen that if EAB isn't super heavily populated in an area, you know, but it's there, it just might not come and land on a trap.
Let's see. In addition to limiting the planting of ash trees, should we not be discouraging planting the other EAB host trees too?
Yeah, I think so too. You know, just in terms of sheer urban tree population, white fringe tree and cultivated olive are pretty low on the list compared to ash. Ash, can make up anywhere from 5 to 40% of a urban tree inventory, depending on where you are. Higher, a lot of cities in the Midwest really planted ash really quite heavily. It's a little bit less planted out on the West Coast, but still really prevalent. But yeah, I would encourage you to remove white fringe tree and cultivated olive from those lists as well. They're not often, I guess olive's not often on tree planting lists, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, we are going to move on to our next speaker. Evan, if you're able, there actually are still a couple more questions in the Q&A for you that you can just type the answers to if you have a few minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Let me stop my sharing and that will do that.
Excellent. All right. Thank you again, Evan.
Yeah.
We are going to move on to Charles Ray from the city of Vancouver, and Charles is going to talk to us about Vancouver's Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan.
Hi, everyone. Charles with the City of Vancouver Urban Forestry. Are you seeing the full screen?
No, so we actually aren't seeing anything at the moment.
Okay. Let's how's that?
Okay, so we see just the PowerPoint in the editing mode. So almost.
Okay. Almost. Let's see here. Let's see. How's that one?
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks and hello, everyone. Charles Ray with Vancouver Urban Forestry, and today I'll cover how Vancouver has been basically getting ready for Emerald Ash Borer and our EAB draft management plan. So we will review Vancouver's EAB prep work, review our initial EAB response, review our draft EAB management plan. And I say draft because there are still holes, partners that need to be followed up with, and things like that. And then review next steps and remaining questions. So first, what's the big deal? Let nature take its course. I think that's everyone's first thought, because we don't have time. Nobody has time for this. But this is what it looks like. All ash trees will be killed. This comes with an enormous expense, cost of removals, disposal, and replanting. And I've seen where it said $30 billion so far, and it's put economic strain on other communities. And then there's the public safety. If left unchecked, all ash trees will be dead within 5 to 10 years. And so dead ash trees become brittle quickly and become a safety issue. And then loss of this one species comes with a significant environmental expense, such as degraded air quality, water quality, erosion, release of carbon, and loss of wildlife benefits, as ash are shelter and food for insects, birds, and animals. And then the public and community health concerns, such as decreased shade, increased temperatures, and increased in cardiovascular and lower respiratory tract illness, which have been shown in several years after EAB outbreaks in Michigan. So our prep work, Vancouver's been planning for this day for years, limiting ash trees on our selection lists and reducing the number of ash trees and plantings throughout the community. Should we have stopped planting altogether years ago? Perhaps, but we're really focused on moderation, reducing populations and concentrations, And we've been passively collecting EAB materials and plans. And there's been traps set throughout the community with the state over the last 10 years. But as we heard from Evan, they're not the greatest traps out there. And we've been monitoring ash populations when we're in parks, when we're doing removals, but then also when we are seeing removal applications from private property. So after Forest Grove was positively identified, we were contacted by, in I think it was July of 22, by Washington Department of Ag regarding setting up new traps. And then they provided some initial guidance, such as act like it's here, plan accordingly to help reduce the spread throughout the rest of the Washington state. So basically, they left us with just do what you can at your local level. So we started drafting a plan, focused on plans we had, and there are a lot of plans out there. Then we found the EAB plan generator, which is a template. It has good information, but there were gaps. So we merged ours with the generator. We started awareness campaign, key stakeholders such as our Urban Forestry Commission, key volunteers, managers, tree care companies, golf course managers, city staff, media contacts such as the Columbian, as well as TV stations. And then we started informing new development projects at pre-construction meetings, not to plant ash trees, to sub those now. And then we just continued to monitor ash populations for signs and symptoms, just with more purpose. So the goals of our Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan really minimize the impact of EAB on the health of Vancouver's urban forest, utilize best management practices available, and then pursue efforts that are as cost effective as possible. So our motions have been all over the map since June of 22, from removal of all ash trees now to metered removals to treating is not reasonable. And so as we move through the planning process, it really helped with clarity. We wanted to get ahead of it. So removing all is not necessary, especially not all at once. Plus, what would we be doing with all that wood? Treatment is a viable option, as Evan indicated in the previous presentation, and not forever. And I think that's where we were getting stuck, is trees don't live forever. Some trees live longer than us, but not forever ever. Thus, we landed on metered removals, just a few trees annually, and then treatment of high value ash trees and then just manage EAB over the next 20 years to reduce having a ton of dead trees all at once. And, just coming to the realization of, if we identify it, if it's found here, that's okay. We're not going to drop everything and not rush to remove them. We will leave the tree or trees until the removal window of, October through March, April, and then hopefully remove them at that point when they're not flying, so that hopefully they've laid their eggs, and hopefully we're crushing those eggs at that time. So the strategies that we will use to mitigate the anticipated loss of canopy and associated benefits and maximize those available resources include monitor ash trees for symptoms of EAB, which is going to be ongoing, slow the movement of EAB as much as possible, chemically treat suitable trees in our high value or high quality trees, remove ash trees that are not suitable for treatment, and that's going to be annually, and then replace with quality trees, and then just communication to stakeholders, which will be ongoing and then targeted. So first step is to know where the ash trees are located. Having an inventory of all public trees is important for effective management and maintenance, but it is especially important when managing invasive pests such as emerald ash borer, Vancouver's tree inventory identified less than 500 individual ash trees on public property, which was about 4%. However, the tree inventory is partial inventory. It does not include all street trees, natural areas, nor ash trees on private property. So continue to focus on diversity is also key, as a diverse urban forest is more resilient and can withstand storm events, insects, and diseases from declining or decimating one species all at once. Again, started monitoring with more purpose. This summer, started identifying declining poor location and trees under 12 inches and starting to develop plans for those removals. Chemical treatments began in 2023. Chemical treatments can control EAB if infestations are detected early. Treatments are most effective in healthy trees and the only management strategy that can protect our mature ash trees. Considering the available options, Vancouver intends to use systemic trunk injections on our high-value ash trees. We're budgeting about $5,000 towards annual treatments, which is with our short timeline of spring of 23. We were working with our maintenance team and decided to contract that out, at least for the first year, and we'll reevaluate it in the future. We treated our heritage trees, our witness trees, which are our memorial trees, some larger ash trees in parks, and then ash trees along the Columbia Renaissance Trail. Protecting mature ash trees is more cost effective than removal, and trees continue to provide those benefits to the community. Plus, there is documented a halo effect. By treating some, it protects others, and by keeping the populations in check. And studies showed that treating on that, stretching those treatments to like that 3 to 5 year is effective as well. So, not all trees are worth treating chemically to prevent infestation. So we'll start removing ash trees this fall. We have developed a list of approximately about 20 trees that we'll strive to remove that are less than 12 inches and declining, and then replacing with a more quality shade tree. Those ash trees that are declining, to reduce the risk of infestation, we marked declining ash trees, and then that's what we were working on this summer. And then we're scheduling those removal between October and April, when the adult emerald ash borer is not flying. And so this allows the cost of ash removals to be spread over more years, as well as removing possible EAB habitat. We are trying to strive to leave all wood on site or take it to one location for processing at this time. Excuse me. Similar recommendations for public, for private, similar to the public, but educating property owners and tree care providers of their options, trying to get them not to move the ash or ash parts, leave on site if possible. And then most likely we'll be working together on street trees. And then the city will step in, require action when there are dead trees, and it becomes a risk to persons or properties. And then replanting with other large quality shade trees is vital to public health. Focusing on that diverse tree canopy and natural areas, planting more willows, cottonwoods, big leaf maples, alders, and Oregon white oaks to diverse that palette, to recoup the benefits lost from that one species. And then we have multiple programs to help with replanting large shade trees from our partnership with our local nonprofit Friends of Trees, our tree fund program, which gives people, they plant on private property, they can get a rebate or get some of those funds returned to them. And then we have our tree giveaway program as well. And then communication, new invasive pests and disease outbreaks can be challenging and difficult to manage due to the lack of information. So getting familiar with those best management practices around the issue and awareness of the issue, being adaptable and having a clear communication strategy is key to mitigating the impacts of these disasters and keeping the community informed on actions that they can take. So main messages, we establish main messages for the community as well as for when we're talking to property owners, that it is an invasive pest threatening to devastate all of our ash trees, stressing to learn about the signs and symptoms of infestations, and then just that their support is needed to monitor, to mitigate whether it's treating or removal, but then also not to move those ash parts or wood to prevent that spread. And then also just those key messages for the media, that EAB is 100% fatal to our ash trees, including the healthy trees, and that it is a hitchhiker, so that don't transport that infested wood. And so when it comes to managing EAB, urban forest management becomes increasingly important as the loss of ash trees will have a significant ecological and economic impact. Community aesthetics as well as overall benefits of trees will be affected. So our next steps, providing the education to staff about proper identification of EAB in other pests and pathogens, as well expand public outreach on EAB and other stressors on our urban forests, distribute material to property owners about EAB management and their options, provide EAB information through our website, which we haven't developed yet, but then also explore the establishment of a fund to assist with that management of private ash trees. And so we're also updating our urban forestry management plan now. So ash and emerald ash borer actions are incorporated into the management plan. It will be taking a lot of our time and resources as we'll be managing this for the next 20 years or beyond. So making leaders and city council aware of the issue, making sure it's in the plan, whether it's the short or long term, so that you can point to it and point to the plan and that it is a priority for the community. So challenges, there's always challenges. First one is just how do we protect our Oregon ash, which is our most abundant ash. It's in our it's our native ash. It's in our creeks, our wetlands, our riparian zones, an important riparian tree, providing so many benefits and ecosystem services. What do we do with the wood? Stripping the wood, who has those capabilities and equipment? That's what we're trying to figure out now. And then where do we put this wood? Where do we store it? What do we do with the chips? Chipping less than an inch, what chippers can do that. Street trees are the responsibility of the adjacent property owners, but we are going to have to take a more active role, especially as we see streets that do have just a majority of ash trees starting to decline all at once. And then private trees, how can we instill the need to take ownership and action so it doesn't spread uncontrollably through the community, but then also throughout the rest of Washington. And then outreach, just continued focused. How do we move forward together? Everyone playing their part. I think that's where everyone here today can think about what you can do or tweaks you can make in your everyday activity or in your management to help reduce the spread of this insect, whether it's, for tree care providers or utilities, having a plan as well, for which includes those best management practices as they become, as those trees become brittle and become a safety issue, as well as the just proper disposal. Report suspected EAB sightings in Washington. The Washington Invasive Species Council. Here's the QR code. But then outside Washington, APHIS as well. Excuse me. Just the key to slowing the movement is don't help them. They're not good flyers. They're hitchhikers, so just don't move those ash parts if feasible and leave on site. That's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Charles. We do have a few questions that came in during your presentation. Let's see. The first one is, our companies applying injection treatment certified in some way?
Yes. So we did go out for bid, and so we selected the bid that had met the qualifications. And if we do it internally, it would be our staff members that do have the pesticide applicator's license.
Why replant with cottonwood? Will this be near structures and roadways?
So cottonwoods would be just in the riparian zones or in those wetlands, and just to recoup those benefits of loss of those ash. So cottonwoods really would be planting in those riparians or natural areas, along with the alders, big leaf maples, and all those willows.
Fine, thank you. Do you think leaving trees on site will allow larvae to pupate and emerge as adults without further treatment, such as chipping?
So that's where what our management plan identifies right now is just chipping everything and leaving everything on site. And if we do have that opportunity to leave large wood, leave that large woody debris on site, so that we can hopefully reduce that spread and leaving it there. The other option is that we have currently is just taking it to one site and this just tub grinding everything.
All right. Do you have an estimation of how much it would be to chemically treat ash trees?
I don't. What we've put is striving to treat about 700 inches of ash a year, and so trying to stretch that out on that 3-year, and then maybe in the future, after a couple of rounds, stretching it out to that 5-year cycle, and then doing those removals of those, whether it's the small trees, declining trees, or just trees not in the best location.
Thank you. Have you received any pushback from adjacent property owners or stakeholders about removing street trees that are still alive? If so, how have you managed?
We have not required anyone to remove. We have not removed any street trees in front of residential properties. We've been really focusing on our inventory of ash trees, and it's mostly in our park system. As we get requests for street tree removal permits, and perhaps it's a declining ash, we would recommend the removal of the adjacent ash if there's still an ash present, even though it might be healthy. We encourage those to be removed. We also started reaching out to property owners about removal of ash if we see those declining ash trees that are street trees, but we have not preemptively gone into neighborhoods and started removing street trees.
Does EAB continue its life cycle on dead trees?
Evan would probably have a better idea of this,
Yeah,
or someone else, but I believe that as long as that cambium layer is active, it is still habitat, and then they'll move on.
Oh, go ahead, Evan. I see you have your hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, they can like larvae can or pupae can like hatch out of chips and stuff like that, but and I think your point, if there's living tissue, then they can feed on it, but generally once a tree is like girdled and dead or something like that, they can't continue feeding on it.
And
Thanks,
this
Evan.
also could be for either one of you. Is there a risk of attracting new populations by using traps?
By using traps, I don't think so. And I think what Evan alluded to is that they're really not attracted to traps. If the populations are really high, they might accidentally land on the trap, but there's not that pheromone that's attracting them to those traps.
All right, it looks like one more question for you. Do you know if the county is doing anything? A lot of Vancouver is outside incorporated Vancouver.
As far as I know, that I'm not aware of the county taking any actions yet.
All right. I believe those are all your questions. Thank you so much again, Charles.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's see. So now we have a break coming up, and we are going to take a break until 10 a.m. So everyone, please return at 10 a.m. Thank you. All right, everyone, welcome back. We are going to continue with our presentations this morning. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Patrick Shults from Washington State University. And Patrick's going to talk about his program at the university and how he conducts landowner research or outreach, sorry.
All right, are you seeing the right screen? Hold on. That look good?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Maria. And hi, everybody. I'm Patrick Shults. I am an extension forester with Washington State University. I'm in Southwest Washington, but based out of Olympia. Maria and Rachel asked me to talk a little bit about what the Extension Forestry Program does, particularly in terms of forest health and invasive pest outreach. So I'll run through the some of our staple programs and some of what we've done, maybe more specifically related to emerald ash borer, and then leave a little time for questions if people have them. So our extension forestry team is these folks right here, relatively small group, especially compared to some of the other states' extension forestry programs, but we do a whole lot with a small team. I think we routinely punch above our weight, and I'm really proud to be a part of this team. And our whole goal, objective, mission statement is kind of pretty well described here. It's providing objective research-based education and resources for owners of forested property, as well as the general public, although we do really focus mostly on reaching out to forest owners and supporting them to achieve their objectives in their forest management through classes and workshops, field days. I'll kind of run through some of the stuff we do, as well as static resources like publications and videos and recorded webinars, becoming more and more part of what we do. So, a lot of forest owners, small non-industrial private forest owners own about 15% of the land or of the forest land in the state. And compared to their public and industrial counterparts, they really don't have a lot of resources to manage those forest lands, but they are really critical forest land for habitat and a number of different reasons. So our objective is to provide them with those resources first through education, and then tapping them into a whole network or landscape of partners that are there to support them as well. For many forest owners, they don't have any sort of background in forestry. They just kind of want to buy their 10 acres and be in the woods. And many are not even aware that forests have to be managed. So that's kind of often the first step, is just bringing that awareness of the benefits of forest management are. And we do that through some really staple programming that I'll dig into in a second. So I'll run through the team real quick. So we have Molly up north. She's actually an extension a forest health specialist, so that's in her title, and we're really excited to have her. She's came on about a year or so ago now. She covers Whatcom, Clallam, Jefferson, and Kitsap counties. We have Kevin and his new hire, Sarah, and together they run the North Puget Sound program for Skagit, Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties. And I hope I'm not butchering any of this. I shouldn't have got into the county listing. And then myself down here in Southwest, and I cover a lot of counties in Southwest Washington, basically Thurston down to Clark and out to the water, and then plus Skamania as well. Joey Hulbert is not technically on the Extension Forestry team, I don't think, but he helps us a lot, and we're really glad to have him, and he's supported a lot of our programs in the past, and he does his own Forest Health Watch program that's related, and supports a lot of good forest health monitoring and citizen science research. I didn't dig into it too much here. I didn't know if he might be speaking at another time, but some really cool programming come out of him in the Puyallup Extension Center. And then we have our team lead, Andy Perleyberg, and he covers all of Eastern Washington. So the east slope of the Cascades, the Blues, and Northeast Washington. We used to have someone in Northeast, but they moved on, and now Andy covers all of that and serves as the team lead. So he's a pretty busy guy. So as I said, between the 5 or 6 of us, we really do a lot of programming. We're very effective, I think, in terms of, and kind of have to be when you're a smaller team. We try to be very efficient and maximize our outreach and exposure to forest owners. So this is just kind of another breakdown of what we do. I'll run through, I'll talk about some of these programs in a little more detail, but forest stewardship coach planning and family forest field days and the winter school are kind of our staples. Those are things a lot of people know us by, and some people on this call may have engaged in some of those programs. But we also have, a whole suite of resources on our website, publications, newsletters. Kevin has a newsletter in the North Puget Sound program. I run a newsletter with the DNR called Forest Stewardship Notes that some of you may be subscribed to. And then we have a library of resources broken down by category on our website that helps forest owners with a variety of different things that they're dealing with. We do, when we're not doing these staple programs, we tailor workshops and webinars to whatever it is that we seem to be getting lots of questions about from forest owners. So we really put our ear to the ground and listen, and then respond accordingly with educational opportunities on just different kind of special niche topics that people are interested in, or if there's a certain forest health issue facing a region, which I'll dig into later. One-on-one assistance, this is less and less a part of our jobs these days. We partner really strong. We have strong partnerships with the DNR and conservation districts, who have foresters that kind of handle a lot of the technical assistance on the ground to doing site visits and things like that. But I still like to get out in the woods as much as I can. But we rely on partners for a lot of that these days, and then we can focus on the education component. And then research and demonstration, particularly demonstration. I know Andy Perleyberg's working really hard on developing a network of demonstration forests throughout the state. I manage a property in Olympia owned by WSU. It's actually owned by the College of Arts and Sciences, but they let me use it for extension forestry programming, and it's just really helpful to be able to have that that exposure on the ground in a place that we can try different things and you leverage it for teaching. All right, so in terms of forest health programming, as I said, our whole objective is to help forest owners achieve their objectives. And the number one objective that every forest owner has is a healthy forest, whether or not they're actively thinking that way. Everybody wants a healthy forest. And then the objectives after that often vary, but that's the number one thing. So it really is a key component of everything that we do in all of our programs. So forest stewardship coach planning, this is really what we call our flagship program, our flagship course. And it's an 8 to 9 week course that walks landowners through the process of developing a forest stewardship plan. And then that stewardship plan can be leveraged to engage in cost share programs with like the NRCS, or certification programs with Washington Tree Farm Program, county tax deferral programs. So it kind of serves as a skeleton key to a lot of resources. So this program, it helps forest owners write their own plans and be a part of that process, which really engages them in their forests and forest management along the way. So it's a really effective course, and it also includes a site visit from usually a DNR or conservation district forester, and a field trip. So forest health is a really big part of that. We spend an entire day and lecture on forest health, usually taught by the DNR Forest Health Division or group, or we teach it ourselves if we have to. And then it's a big part of the field trip as well, and the site visit. The foresters that go and visit these landowners are often looking for key forest health issues to address in the plan. And the forest health part of the plan is often the biggest part, just by nature of what we do, and a lot of these lands maybe being slightly degraded and needing some restoration. So forest health really becomes a key component of this whole program. Likewise, for the Family Forest Field Day, again, some of you may have engaged with this program before. This is This was the Family Forest Field Day in Winlock in 2022 last year. These events often get 200 to 300 landowners. Oftentimes it's their first experience with extension forestry, a first class that they take. And then they get plugged into this network of partners and other programs. They go into the forest stewardship coach planning or get signed up for the listserv, and then they kind of get into the fold. So this is a really great way to expand our outreach. And we do about one of these a year in each region, more or less. And forest health is a really big component of that. The one we did last year in Eatonville, I think we had 5 forest health based classes available, and they're routinely the highest attended. And to take a step back, how these work, you get, we often offer between like 20 and 25 classes and 6 1-hour slots, and then landowners can pick the classes that are most important to them. And often forest health is, full or overly full. We have to actually do multiple sessions of them just because this is something that's always on landowners' minds. Winter school is kind of similar events, multiple classes people can choose from, but it's indoors during the winter. It's a little more talking head, PowerPoint kind of stuff. Before the pandemic, we were doing, Kevin and I were both doing forest health seminars. And what this was, is just 1-hour sessions. We would go out to like an elk lodge or a fire department or a library and talk with community forest owners and kind of tailor it a little specifically to what was going on in that region in terms of forest health. And those were really successful. And if I had time, I would love to do some more of those. But invasive pests and disease were always a component of that when I taught it, just because, knowing that things are coming, like emerald ash borer, for instance, but other examples as well. So it was a good way to expose people to forest health concepts, and then more specific details to what's going on in their region. And then, of course, we do like thinning workshops, which is deeply related to forest health, and online programming. So during the pandemic, we obviously had to switch gears from our usual boots on the ground, in-person stuff, and did a lot more online stuff. And, maybe a little reluctantly at first, but what we found was that, they're just really well attended. And we found that there's a whole segment of the population of forest owners in Washington state that really aren't interested in attending anything in person. At least that's what they kind of told us at the time. And they just want more online programming. So going forward, we've decided, I know I have in my program, to offer a lot more hybrid. Whenever I do something online, I try to think about how I can, or in person, I try to think about how we can offer an online version. The online Family Forest Field Day was an example of that, where, heat of the pandemic, we couldn't go outside. And so we recorded videos with our usual field day speakers and out in the field, and then we streamed those with the speakers available to answer questions. And that was a really successful model, and those recordings are still up on our YouTube channel, and still are gathering recordings. I use them all the time when people are want some resources. And so, yeah, this was a screenshot from that. Actually, I did a forest health video with Glenn Kohler from the DNR, and it was really well received. And then I've also, during the pandemic, started doing something called forestry lunch breaks, which was pretty well received. And last year we did a series on insects and spent a day on invasive forest insects. So these are just kind of bite-sized lessons. But it was really timely because it was also after emerald ash borer had arrived, and so it was pretty well attended. All right, so more specific to emerald ash borer programming, checking my time here. So, when I started the program, or my program here in Southwest, I don't think there'd really been anything done related to emerald ash borer, but having come from Michigan myself, seeing what it did there, and knowing we all knew at some point it was going to get to the Pacific Northwest, started thinking about how we could spread awareness and get people to, understand, what might happen if it came. And that started with these EAB, Emerald Ash Borer seed collection trainings. And that was a partnership with the Forest Service, Richard Sneesko. I hope I'm not butchering his last name. And we put on some trainings because he's a forest geneticist and was studying emerald ash borer resistance in Oregon ash, the native Oregon ash, and we needed samples from Washington. So I thought maybe we could recruit some forest owners to do that. And a part of those trainings was helping people understand why we're doing this. What is the threat of emerald ash borer in Washington? And that was the first little bit of programming we did on emerald ash borer. Admittedly, they were not super well attended. It wasn't terrible. It did result in a handful of seed collections, but I think people just weren't, it was so theoretical at the time. I think people weren't fully engaged with the idea of emerald ash borer being a real threat yet. Of course, cut to 2022, last June, emerald ash borer is found in Oregon. There's a lot of news about it. We start getting lots of questions, start getting lots of pictures of, like sapsucker damage and stuff, and people wondering if that's emerald ash borer. And so I decided to do a few more focused workshops on emerald ash borer in October of last year. One in Richfield and one in Olympia, 2-hour evening sessions, and we just covered a lot of different stuff, including how to ID an ash tree, to emerald ash borer identification, getting into some of the slow ash mortality concepts, and just thinking about what kind of impact it could have in Washington. And those were really well attended. We had over 60 people attend those the two events, and it was a good mix of forest owners and professionals, master gardeners, things like that. And then in April of this year, Kevin and I did a webinar, and he presented, I coordinated, and it's just another 1 hour kind of touching on the basics of emerald ash borer, what to expect, why are we worried about it. And that was pretty well attended. I think we had 330 people sign up for it, and about a third of those show up. If anybody's ever run a webinar, you know that only about a third of the people that sign up actually show up for the live. But then we made that recording available publicly, and it's continuing to get views. And really, that was the purpose, is we wanted to have a recorded webinar that we could send to people that have questions. And then the Forest Overstory podcast, that's something that I host, and we did an episode I don't remember when we did it, but it's episode 16. You can see it there. And with Karen Ripley from the Forest Service, and we talked all about emerald ash borer, what people can expect and why we're concerned. I think one of the interesting parts about emerald ash borer from a small forest landowner perspective is that, even in Southwest, most small forest landowners don't have an ash tree on their property, but the ones that do have a lot of it. So we're going to see a disproportionate impact on a smaller number of landowners, and they're really going to need a lot of support. And then likewise, a lot of people, that doesn't even touch on the whole urban perspective and homeowners that have ornamental ash trees, and cities like Lacey, where I'm close by, has significant ash populations in street trees. And so it's we all know that it's coming. It's not necessarily in Washington yet, but so I'm hoping that some of these programs just kind of builds awareness and helps people understand where they can turn to when that time comes, and where they can report a sighting. Even that was a big part of the webinar and the podcast as well. So some of the evaluation results from those programs, I'll just touch on this briefly. We measure, usually with these evaluations, we do one right after the program, and then we kind of circle back a year later, or maybe a couple years later, and see, what did you do with that information? I haven't done that yet with these because it's kind of hard. There's not much to do about this yet, right? It hasn't really worked its way through Washington, but 100% of the attendees at the workshops did intend to apply what they learned. And we also saw meaningful increases in all knowledge, or in knowledge before and after workshops, in all topics covered, except ash tree identification, which I was actually excited to see, because it meant that they weren't just clicking buttons because they had a good time at the workshop. They were being truthful about their responses. So we did see meaningful increases there. And these are the topics that we covered in those workshops. For the webinar, a little less, a good chunk less, really. 62% of attendees intended to apply what they learned. but we did still see meaningful increases in knowledge in all of those topics, again, except ash tree identification. And then this is a breakdown of, or some of the characteristics of the attendees. We had 63% owning or managing land with Oregon ash. 14% had non-native ash on their property. 42% were forest owners, 19% were natural resource professionals, and 18% were master gardeners or master naturalists, which I was really excited by this number because I think a lot of folks, you know, when this rolls through Washington, I think a lot of folks are going to be going to their master gardeners first. You know, those folks that really spend a lot of time on their landscaping and are seeing damage to their ornamental ash trees, they're probably going to go to the master gardener office first. And so they can be a really effective tool for monitoring the spread of emerald ash borer when the time comes. All right, so you know, what's next in terms of emerald ash borer, you know, specifically, again, it is not in Washington that we know of, but when it happens, you know, it will be really important to leverage partnerships for cost share to support those forest owners, as I said, I think will be disproportionately impacted. So DNR has cost share programs, NRCS has cost share programs that could be used to help, you know, support landowners replanting or ideally diversifying stands ahead of emerald ash borer moving through, and kind of mitigating some of that damage and putting in some of those slow ash mortality practices in place. Cross-state collaboration on research, education, and monitoring. Oregon's doing a really killer job with all of this and dealing with their infestation and forest growth. And I've been able to sit in on some of those meetings, and having that partnership will be really important when the time comes so that we can kind of learn from what they did and mirror it here in Washington. As I said, leveraging community, I think it would be cool to do trainings just for master gardeners and master naturalists and emerald ash borer identification. But then again, back to this Forest Health Watch program that Joey Holbert I mentioned runs. I think that would be a really effective tool for emerald ash borer. I'm sure he's doing work with it. Well, in fact, I know he's doing work. Him and Kevin were working on a fact sheet. So in terms of resource development, that should be on its way out. I think Molly was working on a video as well. So more resources to come from WSU Extension on emerald ash borer. But I'll just say that in general, you know, Extension Forestry is really well set up. Obviously, I mean, it's our whole job is outreach to forest owners for the next invasive pest or disease, and they're just a really effective group of people for getting the word out. So if anyone listening is you know, needing partners for that kind of function, then you should definitely reach out to us. And with that, I will say I think there's some time for questions if we have them. And I've got my email here, though, if you want to email me afterwards. And then our website is here, and you can get the contact information for some of our other folks. And, you know, just dig through the website because there's a lot of resources there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Yep.
There are a few questions for you that I can read. The first one is, what Washington State University Extension forestry staff covers Mason County?
Oh, that's me.
All right.
That's easy. Yeah.
Beautiful. This is just a statement. As a master gardener, training would be great for the 300 master gardeners in Snohomish County.
Wow, 300. I didn't know that. But yeah, I agree. That'd be really awesome.
A friend attended your Eatonville workshop and has forest land in Priest River, Idaho. Washington State University Extension has been helpful for her, but does Idaho have any similar resources?
Yeah. They have a couple sort of, I don't even know if they would be called extension foresters necessarily, but we have some analogs over there. And I can think of a few. Krishnepp would be one, but if they want to reach out to me, I can put them in touch.
Thank you. All right, that is all your questions. So thank you so much again.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Let's see.
Oh, I have to stop sharing somehow.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, hold on. There we go.
Excellent. All right, everyone, we're going to switch gears for a little while here, and we are going to talk about the spotted lanternfly. And I'm thrilled to introduce Jessica LaBelle, the Invasive Species Program Specialist from the Washington Invasive Species Council, who's going to talk to us about the spotted lanternfly and a threat to Washington's communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. Yeah, so again, I'm Jessica LaBelle. I'm Invasive Species Program Specialist for the Washington Invasive Species Council. Today we're going to talk about spotted lanternfly, concerns for Washington and the threats to its municipalities. So spotted lanternfly, just to give you a little overview, it's like Lycorma delicatula. It is a plant hopper and a piercing sucking insect. So thankfully they don't pierce and suck people, but they do pierce and suck plants. They're sap suckers essentially. And you can see on that insect that's on its back there, that red box outlining the proboscis that they use to pierce the stem and trunks of plants and trees. So they're native to China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, and they've been accidentally introduced and are considered invasive in South Korea, Japan, and the United States. They feed on over 170 known species of plants, and they have a unique relationship with Tree of Heaven, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Tree of Heaven is a Class C weed in Washington, meaning it's either widespread or of agricultural concern, or in this case, charmingly, both. So the real damage from spotted lanternfly comes from their feeding behavior. So they pierce the stem or the bark of a plant or tree, and they feed on the phloem, so kind of like the sugary sap substance. And just that feeding behavior weakens the plant. They also kind of like to cluster feed, like you can see on that photo on the right, where just a whole bunch of them, when they find something good, will start feeding on it. So pretty damaging in itself. However, the main problem with spotted lanternfly is as they're eating, they're continually defecating. And so they leave behind this very sugary substance called honeydew, which you can see in that photo on the left on the leaf. And honeydew promotes the growth of sooty mold on the plant, which will block it from photosynthesizing. And it will also attract other insects, other pests, and the weakened plants may die. So this shows the current spread of spotted lanternfly in the United States. This map was updated in June. All of this came from one initial detection in Pennsylvania in 2014. So all of this spread is from one introduction of spotted lanternfly, and that was believed to be on a shipment of stone coming from Asia. So just once, 2014, and now it's in 15 states and counting. So because this is moving so quickly across the US, there was a study done for habitat suitability about where the spotted lanternfly might establish if it could go anywhere that it wanted to. And so this map kind of shows the habitat suitability of the continental US, with red being the most suitable and most at risk from spotted lanternfly, and white being unsuitable areas. And you can see this is a concern because this is an agricultural pest, and also preys upon trees. And so that includes quite a bit of our kind of agricultural breadbasket and a lot of our major cities as well. Part of that same study looked specifically at Washington State. So that's what this map shows. Same deal with the red being the most susceptible to spotted lanternfly, most suitable habitat for them. So you see that I-5 corridor and a lot of our big cities in there, and then our agricultural breadbasket in Eastern Washington. So big concern. So this is an infographic from the Washington State Department of Agriculture showing the different agricultural commodities that Washington produces, and kind of the bigger the words in this image, the greater the production that this has. And so in Washington, big concern because some of these are directly correlated to host plants for spotted lanternfly. Grapes, hops, cherries, peaches and other stone fruit, apples, almonds. We have pine and other conifers on here too, as well as hardwoods, and then culturally significant ethnobotanicals, which we'll get into a little bit later. So these numbers are from 2021. Of course, you can't put a number on everything that's important, but here's some economic impacts for you. Apples, 2.185 billion in 2021. Hops, $482.2 million coming into Washington. Cherries, 476.4 million. Grapes, 300.7 million. Blueberries, 228.3 million. And all of these, again, host plants for spotted lanternfly. Timber, 3.06 billion. Washington actually accounts for 25% of US log and lumber product exports and 9% total of US paper products. Cultural resources, can't put a price on those. They're really invaluable. And then our environment, our evergreen state, want to keep it that way. And our communities, our urban landscapes and our street trees and all those plants that are so important to our communities. Can't really put a price on those either. So the good news is that spotted lanternfly is not here yet, right? And as far as moving around, just the insect itself, it can only really jump, crawl, or fly for short distances. It's kind of a poor flyer. But the way that they get around is they're moved inadvertently by people. So they're very stealthy hitchhikers, and all the life stages can hitchhike to new areas, whether that's the egg masses, you can see in that little illustration in the center, the nymphs, so the juveniles, and the black and white spotted is a younger one, and then the red and black and white spotted is a later instar species of spotted lanternfly, and then the adults, which have those beautiful, distinctive red hind wings, but you might not see them kind of sitting like that. It's only really when they're startled or when they're about to take off. Most often they're sitting like the little guy on the left with their wings folded, and you just see the outsides of the forewing. And we have had dead specimens of spotted lanternfly found in California and in Oregon as well. So they can get to the West Coast. So here's some photos of how easy it is to miss these guys. The egg masses, which you can see in some of the photos on the right, they really just look like a smear of mud or clay, so they can blend in really easily. And they do like to lay them on smooth or rusty surfaces. It's kind of going to blend in, provide some camouflage. But then a lot of those things, those man-made items, they move. They move across the U.S. So could be really difficult. Hidden in the wheel wells of vehicles, could be hard to see. You can see this one that's an adult just on the exterior of a car. Think about all the times you've been at a stoplight and there's a little bug that you notice sitting on your windshield who's going for a ride with you. Well, hopefully not an invasive one. So just a little bit about that, kind of a fun thing. Many people think that animals and insects are expanding their range kind of under their own power. And sometimes that's true. But most of the time that's not the case, and they're really moved by people. So I like to say that anything that moves can move an invasive species. So whether that's your personal vehicle, hopefully you have a really, really snazzy personal vehicle like that, whether it's people moving cross country, moving your belongings, they can hitchhike on your outdoor furniture and birdhouses, whatever you're bringing along. Or while you're recreating, Aquatic invasive species can move on kayaks and boats, can move on your vehicles and camping equipment. It's unintentional for sure, but just as we learned during the pandemic, it's not just our local resources that keep society running. A lot of what we have relies on travel and transportation. So it's especially important to be aware of that and check for invasive species. So then some other potential pathways. The Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma are some of the largest and busiest ports in the US. So we've got international shipping trade coming in. And then there's also air travel. A little friend can hop in on your luggage and then go with you. So got to be careful about your belongings. And then some kind of atypical pathways, invasive insects can move around in plants, whether that's nursery stock. A lot of the times the plants that we buy aren't really grown locally. They're coming from greenhouses in other states, maybe other countries. They're coming from all over. So that's one pathway that nursery services and regulatory agencies really are concerned about and check up on. And then they can travel, not necessarily maybe spotted lanternfly, but other insects and weed seeds can travel on your shoes. So it's super important to clean your boots in between the places that you're recreating. Make sure you're not taking any little friends with you in the treads of your shoes. And then many invasive insects take shelter in or lay their eggs in wood piles. So super important to not move firewood and buy it where you burn it. Yeah, please purchase your firewood locally. So this here shows a railway map of the US, and you can see kind of some of these numbers that are in a little faded. That's the number of days of transit between these routes. So you can see if something started in Pennsylvania or another infested area, could really end up in the Pacific Northwest in just a matter of days. And spotted lanternfly can survive being contained and being shipped for that amount of days. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture actually found that was confirmed to be one of the ways that spotted lanternfly was moving around locally, is that it was using the railway system. And so they were laying egg masses on rail cars, etc. They really liked the surfaces there. So here's an infographic from Washington State University showing the different life cycle stages of spotted lanternfly and what to look out for. So it shows those different colors of nymphs, that the juveniles that I talked about before, and then that a very striking colored adult, and then the egg masses. And it kind of shows in that little egg case section on the right. The eggs, originally, they're just kind of little beaded dots, kind of, and then they are actually covered by the female to kind of blend in. And then that egg case color can darken as it weathers and is exposed to the elements. So whenever I talk about spotted lanternfly, I always hope that this is your takeaway. If you don't take anything else away, please remember this part. If you think you've seen a spotted lanternfly in Washington, take a picture of it, note the location, and report it. It is so incredibly important. Save the specimen if you can. They don't bite, they don't sting, they can't hurt you. You can handle them safely. If you actually take if it's sitting on something and you don't want to touch a bug, I feel you. You can take an empty water bottle and just hold the mouth of it kind of over it, and they'll actually jump backwards into the water bottle, and you can just cap them in there and keep them in there. The way you can report, 3 different ways. You can email the Washington State Department of Agriculture directly at pestprogram@agr.wa.gov. You can call them on their pest hotline at 800-443-6684. Or my personal favorite, you can report using your phone or tablet with the Washington Invasives app. And so this is a free app for Android and Apple that is through the Washington Invasive Species Council. So it's our app. It's really great, pretty simple to use, has like a digital field guide. You can put photos, you can put the locations right in there. And once you get into your report queue and submit that report, it goes directly to verifying experts, like they get pinged instantly. So really great. And I've worked on many invasive species projects kind of throughout the years, and the role of the public and the role of just people keeping their eyes out really can't be understated. An incredible amount of progress has been made due to public reports. There are only so many invasive species professionals working. We can't be everywhere at once, but people who are out recreating, who are spending time outside, who are working outside, who are just enjoying a cup of coffee on the deck, those are the eyes that we need and that really, really help us. So we need those eyes across the state. So please keep an eye out for this pest and report it. So another thing to keep an eye out for is tree of heaven. I mentioned about this a little earlier before. A spotted lanternfly has a unique relationship with tree of heaven. So tree of heaven is a fast spreading and growing tree, and it's a class C weed. It forms thickets. It's very difficult to control. It creates compounds that are toxic to other plants. It has kind of a terrible smell. I'm told it smells like rancid peanut butter or rancid popcorn. I haven't smelled one yet myself. That's on my bucket list. I want to go smell the tree of heaven. I might regret it afterward, but I gotta know. And these were kind of promoted actually in urban environments to control erosion because they are so fast growing. And now we're finding, they're an issue. They reproduce via seeds and root suckers. They're kind of difficult to remove. The stump can sprout. We're going to hear more about them later in the summit. So I won't talk too much about it, but when spotted lanternfly is exposed to tree of heaven at some point in its life cycle, they can actually become more reproductively hardy. So they don't need it to live, but it does make them much more of a contender for establishing and being even more invasive. So if you have tree of heaven and you're looking for resources to help you with it, contact your local county noxious weed control board. You can talk to your local conservation district, talk to the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board, so the overarching organization, or your Washington State University Extension Office. So a lot of the folks that are participating in this summit today. And specific offices and services are going to vary depending on where you're located in Washington. So one of the ways that Washington has been proactive in preparing for this pest is we received a $90,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Plant Protection and Quarantine, so USDA APHIS PPQ. And that was to complete the goals here and really prepare for spotted lanternfly. So we developed a spotted lanternfly preparedness advisory group consisting of all these state partners, our federal partners, tribal partners, and then industry and other stakeholders, super helpful. And collectively, we worked together to write a state action plan about what was at risk from spotted lanternfly in Washington and how to respond. And so that was completed in July. So we have our plan and we are ready. And this is some of the things that the state action plan covers. Now, short-term management, early detection, rapid response, eradication efforts, all those ideal things when you can have early detection. Early detection, super helped out by, like I mentioned before, public outreach and people knowing what it is and when to report it. Long-term management in case it establishes or for monitoring, whether there are quarantines or rulemaking processes that are going to be needed, just kind of outlining those steps so it's streamlined if that time comes or it needs to be put in place. Tree of heaven control in strategic areas, potential economic and cultural impacts, and then what I'm going to talk about next here, which is urban and community impacts. So although this is primarily classified as an agricultural pest, they do affect trees. And so street trees, and green spaces, those provide a number of benefits that I'm sure I don't need to tell all you guys about, but I will anyway. Shade, reducing air and noise pollution, providing habitat for other species, providing positive mental health benefits, and visual appeal. Like, we love our trees. Spotted lanternfly predation can have a greater impact on young or newly planted trees. So trees that are already under stress are going to be at increased risk as well. And tree planting programs may take a significant hit because they'll both be needed for mitigation due to host plant removal or death, but they may also be providing additional trees that could be at risk. So things to consider. This has the potential to affect everyone, but it is likely to disproportionately affect overburdened and historically underserved communities. So to me, snug in my home, my shade trees are important to me because they shade my car. They support bird life. They make me happy to look at. I love my trees, but a shade tree is going to be vastly more important to someone who is unhoused. That might directly support their life, really. And in addition, at some points, in infestation, if things get out of control and a pest establishes in an area, residents might become responsible for treating their own trees at their own cost. And that's going to be harder for certain communities than it is going to be for others. So that can lead to a great reduction in green spaces, potentially, which would be very unfortunate for our cities and urban environments. And mitigation, super important to replace those green spaces with ideally with plants that are not hosts for invasive pests. But then one thing to consider too is staff time. Any urban forestry department or tree service company is going to be experiencing a deluge of calls, complaints, questions, requests, etc. And many cities and companies, large and small, just don't have the additional resources to account for staff time just to field those complaints. People, homeowners and residents are going to be seeing, their trees dying that are so important to them. You're going to be hearing about it. So some of the species that are host plants for spotted lanternfly and that are at risk are listed here. So we've got our maples. Maples fare well in urban settings, and as a result, they comprise a huge proportion of urban tree canopies. Sycamore, kind of in that same genus. Birch, they're susceptible to other stressors, including bronze birch borers, so they've already got the deck kind of stacked against them. Ash, as we heard about previously, are already under threat from a different pest, under threat from this one as well. Oaks are important in urban ecosystems and support a wide variety of species that depend on them. Lindens, great street trees, but already susceptible to aphids and honeydew. hornbeams are very popular plantings, dogwoods, important small shade trees, cherry and plum, very popular ornamentals. And then even aspen, it can be used as ornamentals or landscaping in small areas, like between sidewalks and buildings. And so all those species are at risk from spotted lanternfly. And one more thing that I like to touch on when I'm talking about the Washington State Spotted Lanternfly action plan is that we also included a section on cultural impacts. So this is one of the first plans, state action plans for a plant health pest that actually takes an in-depth focus on cultural impacts and really looked at culturally significant ethnobotanicals that are at risk from spotted lanternfly. So that's going to be more than just first foods. It's plants that are ceremonially significant, plants that are used for making shelter, plants that are used in maybe basket weaving, in religious ceremonies, for cooking, all these different kinds of things, really any plants that are culturally significant. And that was a significant challenge in kind of identifying those plants. Traditional knowledge keepers in tribal nations and indigenous communities have historically very good reasons for not wanting to publicize what are important to them. So the way we adjusted to that while remaining culturally sensitive was to conduct a literature review of already published culturally significant ethnobotanicals, the stuff that's already out there. And then we contrasted that list with known spotted lanternfly host plants. In addition, we gained some information on how to notify tribal nations and indigenous communities when you're conducting work in an area. And there's a county list with the Recreation and Conservation Office cultural resource staff, who I cannot recommend highly enough. They are amazing. Provided that we included in the action plan about which tribes and indigenous communities to notify when you're performing work in a particular area. Tribal nations and indigenous communities, they don't just have interests on their reservation land or on tribally owned land, they have interests all over the state. So super important to notify them when you're doing work in a particular area and let them know what's at risk and what to look out for in their own communities. And this is just some specific species of culturally significant ethnobotanicals from the state action plan that are also hosts for spotted lanternfly. And you can see some of those are on our urban tree list as well. So because spotted lanternfly, again, has not yet made it to Washington, this is not an exhaustive list. They are continuing to find new hosts as they move westward. This is only a list of the genuses that are known that they prey upon. So this is my contact information, and that's it for me. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and if we have some time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have as well.
All right, thank you, Jessica. We do have a few questions for you. The first one is, what factors attribute to high suitability of spotted lanternfly within the strip between Grays, Harbor, and Mason County?
Oh, that's a good question that I don't have the answer for because I'm not the one that conducted the study. If you give me an email though, I can send that paper over to you and you might find some answers there on what the different factors are.
Excellent, thank you. Hello, is the control tree of heaven starting to be more important in Washington? I see it is a Class C weed, not highly regulated.
Yeah, that's part of our state action plan, is because of that interesting reproductive relationship between spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven. We've really been promoting removal of tree of heaven as a preventative measure to keep it from just taking a foothold if it gets here, the spotted lanternfly gets here. So yeah, there has been an increased interest in removing that preemptively.
All right. Is there funding available to help remove large, mature stands of tree of heaven? There is a large population of big old trees at the University of Washington parking lot.
Yeah, so that would be a great question for some of the resources that I listed earlier, which is going to be, you know, the Noxious Weed Control Board and your local county weed boards, maybe WSU Extension. I know there are some funding programs available for different things, but I can't speak to the specifics of them, but they can.
All right. Can SLB control tree of heaven? The enemy of my enemy is a friend.
Can what control tree of heaven?
SLB. That's
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is either.
If you guys want to shoot me an email, you know, kind of maybe explaining the acronym and that I'm not familiar with, I would love to hear about it.
Excellent. Okay. The next one I can actually answer. What is the name of the app you mentioned from the Washington Invasive Species Council? You will learn all about it tomorrow, but it is called WA Invasives, and you can find it on our website that Jessica has there on the screen. But we will be going through our reporting app tomorrow. So, all right. Those are all the open questions. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Awesome.
You
Thank
do have a lot of compliments in the chat regarding your graphics, sense of humor, including and being sensitive to tribal nations. So excellent work. Thank you. All right, everyone. We are now going on our second break for the day. So we have a 15-minute break. Please return at 11:15 promptly, and we will begin again. Thank you. All right, everyone, welcome back. It's 11:15. So we are now going to hear from Corrie Podolak with the Underwood Conservation District about their tree of heaven removal program.
Hi there. Thank you, Maria, for the introduction. And I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. Once I... Hold on one second. Sorry, one moment. Having a small issue with finding the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's not popping up, so one sec. There we go. And then I'm gonna share my sound. All right, so I've been working with the Underwood Conservation District for just over a year, and my primary role has been working on the Tree of Heaven. And I'm going to share with you all what we have learned and some of the, some of the basics about the Tree of Heaven, as well as lessons learned over the time that we've been working on the program. And so I'll dive right in. A little bit of information about Underwood Conservation District and conservation districts in general. We are a non-regulatory state agency, and we work with willing landowners to implement conservation practices. So a little fun fact about conservation districts are that it's voluntary. People come to us with issues that they would like guidance on, and it is all voluntary. We also have a board of 6 members, I believe, currently, that help guide our decision making, and they're very helpful. And this was the original board, 1940, and back in 1940. Some of the resources that we offer are all, conservation based, and things like farm planning, and we have a new tool library that we lend out tools, large and small implements to people so that they don't have to spend the money themselves. The farmers have loved our no-till drill, and we do water quality, irrigation improvements, fish passages, I should have included, and soil health and weed management, as well as fire mitigation, to name a few. I'm sure I'm missing some. And we just, go out and do a lot of technical assistance visits and offer advice as people reach out. So our district is located here at the south end of the Cascade Mountain Range, and we cover quite a bit of ground, and I'll show you a little more on the next slide. So the district is from the west side of the Klickitat River all the way over to basically Skamania here. And we also include Mount St. Helens and a portion of Mount Adams. So it covers, I think it's 2,200 square miles approximately. And then zooming in a little closer on the map, when I should go back a second, this here is white salmon, where and Bingen is just below, where we've been focusing our efforts on Tree of Heaven, because that we're just kind of starting here, working our way out. We'll see what else we can accomplish, but this is definitely a large enough area to focus on for now. So this is one map put out by WSDA that this is older. So this is definitely not all of it. And to be honest, the mapping is where we could definitely do a little bit better job of covering, where the trees are. It's been such a, just get on top of the treatments and try to reduce the population. It's kind of our first goal. And then I'd like to get onto the mapping. We could use more staff to cover some of this. But anyway, so this is just a brief overview of, this is actually just Bingen white salmon. I don't have on here, but it also has quite a bit of saturation of tree of heaven. And as Jessica kind of started in on, this is probably one of the slides we kind of repeat here, but it is a Class C noxious weed, and unfortunately is not required to control. So that's something it would be nice to get, to a point where it was required that to control it on your property. Because if we could get landowners on board doing their own treatments, we'd definitely be able to make a bigger dent. It's hard for one organization to cover a lot of these trees just because there are so many. Again, as Jessica mentioned, it's a hugely fast growing, fast spreading tree, and it often just creates monocultures. And part of that is because of its allelopathic characteristic, and that the roots are able to basically crowd or kill surrounding plants. So it has a superpower and basically just keeps other plants from growing around it and crowding them out. And of course, as Jessica went into and had great information on, it's the host for their preferred host for the spotted lanternfly. And it's incredible at reproducing by seed, root suckers, and root stumps, which I'll go into more on that. So it's an incredibly big tree. When it's full grown, it can live up to 100 years, and 80 feet tall is, an approximation, but it grows like 10 to 15 feet in a year and is just an incredibly good shade tree, unfortunately. So many people, liked it when it was first planted because of that reason. And it does a great job at shading. So that's, I've been a little bit of a hang up with people, oh, it's a great shade tree, why would I take it down? Not realizing, that most people don't realize that it has such an invasive property. It does have a foul smell. I don't think it's as bad as people, say, but that's a little side note. The seeds are viable for about a year, so that's of course not in our favor. And one of the crazy things about it is it just grows with, basically no water, comes out of cracks, and you'll see it in some sidewalks and foundations, and it can really impact people's foundations under their properties and cause havoc in there, all kinds of, electrical and plumbing issues if it's let go. It's feisty. So going into the leaf identification, one of the biggest things I think that makes it easy to identify when there are leaves on the tree is that the leaf edges are smooth. So they have a compound leaf arrangement, and there's one leaf at the end of the compound, and then it also has this rounded leaf edge that you can see. It's not the best picture of it, but like I said, if you are looking to identify it, look for the smooth leaf edge, because that's the biggest way to determine its tree of heaven. And here you can see it does have kind of a reddish color to its stem, and there's also, it's like a heart-shaped scar when you snap off the stem. So something to note, which I've seen that on some of the other lookalikes, so it's not the best determining factor. And then the bark is sort of cantaloupe skin looking, not as dark as some of the lookalikes, like the black walnut, which I'll show you later or in a few slides. But yeah, I think it looks like cantaloupe skin. So something to take note of. This picture over here is, or on the right-hand side, is when somebody cut a stump, the tree just completely goes crazy and sends up lots of suckers. And here we have a small grove forming because somebody cut the tree. Again, that's something I'll go into. Cutting is not what we want to do. I think that covers that. So the plants are dioecious, meaning male and female. The females are the ones that have the seed pods. And if you're trying to be strategic in the trees that you're treating with herbicide or killing, you could definitely focus on the females is one approach, because then at least we're eliminating the ones with the seed pods. They are incredibly good at traveling. So of course, they get in people's truck beds or, on their windshields, and then they travel that way, as well as the vicious wind that we have here in the gorge. So that completes most of that. Some of the lookalikes to be aware of. Tree of Heaven is in the sumac family. So of course these other sumacs look similar, but are much smaller, only 10 to 20 feet tall. The smooth sumac is native, just as a FYI, and the staghorn sumac is not native. So, but they also spread in thickets. So they could be confused, but I think even more so, the black walnut is probably the most, I think looks the most like the Tree of Heaven and can be most easily confused. Luckily, when you have leaves on the trees, it does have a serrated leaf edge. So that's my biggest indicator, because it has the compound leaf as well. And it grows to a similar size. And as you can see here, though, the bark is quite a bit darker and more fissured. So not as white as the Tree of Heaven bark. And of course, when the walnuts or the fruit is on the tree, it's much easier to tell that it's black walnut, but they're not always there, of course. So the native range of the Tree of Heaven, of course, started in China and has spread throughout the world, and is vigorously growing in many places. Of course, across the United States here and in Washington and Oregon, there's quite a lot of it as well. And this map just shows some of the worst areas in Washington. So the Tree of Heaven was planted by Sam Boardman, who was a superintendent for the state parks in the 30s and 40s. And his brilliant idea was, at the time, maybe it was brilliant, he wanted to create more shade. So he planted these by the thousands along the Columbia River, and also planted Russian olive and black locust in huge numbers. So we are battling it partially because of this, this idea that he had. And I will note, they just do amazingly well in disturbed areas. So something to be on top of or aware of is, in a disturbed area, try to plant native species, or ideally native species, in order to keep some of these invasive species from coming in. It's just, we often just leave the land after we've disturbed it, or create it, or whatever we're industrial areas we're trying to make, to create. It's just, we often just leave it and don't think about the fact that there's going to be invasive species most likely coming in to take over. So wish we could be more proactive that way. And again, I won't go too much into this because Jessica did such a wonderful job covering it, but the spotted lanternfly is one of the main reasons that we want to create, control the Tree of Heaven. And it was found back in 2014. And of course, it is a beautiful insect, but not one that we want here. So just another reminder of what it looks like, and report it, as Jessica drove home and, make sure that we don't let these slip by. So some of the outreach that we have done, we attend city council meetings and just try to get the word out as much as we can locally, and get all the cities involved. And we created a website that has quite a bit of information. Probably could add some more now that we have a little more resources to contribute to that. Flyers and signage, and as well as social media, to try to get the word out that way, and attending community events to tell people about this incredibly invasive tree. And we created an outreach video that I may have time to show at the end, kind of just depending on question and answers, or how much time we have. So progress made. This started, like I said, back in fall of 2022, and we've had incredible help from the city of White Salmon, city of Bingen, a volunteer, Jeff Kesnick, and hopefully I'm saying that right, because I believe he's on here, from the city of Vancouver. And we also had help from Klickitat County and Skamania County Noxious Weed Control staff, and they have all been incredibly helpful. The treatments on the trees would never have happened without them, so incredibly grateful. This year we probably covered, or we did cover, 64 private landowners in White Salmon and Bingen, and it's really hard to get an exact number on the number of trees that we treated because there's so many. So around 2,400 trees. And we also treated business parking lots along the railroads, public right-of-ways, and just all of the areas that we could cover that didn't necessarily always need waivers, like I said, if they were in the public right-of-way. So that's something to mention, is that we did do waivers for private landowners. This year we started it kind of middle of last year because we realized that there was some liability involved, if we ended up accidentally impacting decorative plants that were nearby the Tree of Heaven. That was an issue that we had to address, so we created a waiver, just letting people know that yes, herbicides do have a little bit of risk, and that it's not a perfect, you can't always perfectly apply the herbicide. I mean, of course, we do your very best, and of course, certified herbicide applicators are all trained to do that. So I think everybody that we worked with were certified, although we had a few helpers here and there that were not. And so finding certified herbicide applicators that had time to help us was one of the challenges that we've faced. And funding, we just wanted to, make sure that we could approach the program in a broad spectrum way, but at times the funding and grants were a little limiting. So then, as I mentioned, the waivers were a little bit time consuming to make sure everybody had them signed. I also, just dealing with managing schedules and making sure people could ideally be there, because we wanted to teach people how to do the herbicide applications themselves so that they could do them on their own, just because that's the most effective way. And I think another thing I would say is a little bit of an issue is it seems like there's multiple mapping sites to report on, and that I think is a challenge, because then it doesn't really give the whole picture. And just, lots of people interested and too many trees to treat in one season. So I will go into herbicide application in a little bit and talk more about the timing of herbicide application and that. So ways that we can help, like I was mentioned before, native species, promoting non-invasive alternatives, learn about the trees that you're going to be that you want to plant, to make sure that it's not something that is going to be a problem for the community, because a lot of nurseries sell plants that are invasive, and they're not usually the best option for the long term. So please be aware. Talk to your neighbors about the tree of heaven and report findings. And just controlling it, like I said, on your own property is really, really helpful. A couple of the reporting or mapping sites that you can use, eddmaps.org. And I think this is the one that Jessica also mentioned, the invasivespecies.wa.gov /report a sighting. That's the other, those are the two that I think, would be great if we could kind of hone in on and just report on those two sites, or maybe even combine them somehow. That's probably another topic to dive into at another time. So I want to drive home the fact that cutting down the tree of heaven is not the way you want to tackle this tree, because when you do, as you can see, it sprouts up hundreds or many babies, if you want to call them, and then of course you're just creating, kind of stoking the fire. So really you want to kill the tree first with an herbicide. Unfortunately, that is the main way to kill the tree, and we've been using Penn State for our research, because they've been dealing with tree of heaven for many years, and they have done the most research on the tree of heaven. So Penn State University, if you're looking for information, is a great source. So some of the chemical controls that you can use, I'll just dive into 3 of them primarily, and these are the primary ones to use anyway. Foliar spray. So when the leaves are out, using a backpack sprayer is your best option, just because it's quickest. Of course, watching out for nearby plants is important, so that you're not affecting them as well. You can always use cardboard to kind of protect surrounding plants. Painting the herbicide onto the leaves if you don't have a huge infestation. Those are some options. This year we were primarily using triclopyr, because everything that we're reading, latest research, is that triclopyr may be our best bet. So we tried to kind of focus on using that herbicide the most this year. Hack and squirt is periodic cuts around the trunk, and this has to be done, both of these have to be done in summer, early fall. So that's, July to October. And hack and squirt, the best results we've seen are with imazapyr and triclopyr. And of course, always follow the label instructions and local regulations. The volunteer Jeff from Vancouver gave me these 2 as good options for people to use on their property, just as over-the-counter, easy to find foliar spray that you can use. So if you have sprouts in your yard, this is a good option, and they won't harm non-woody plants or grass. So these are 2 that you can pick up at the hardware store. I figured it was worth including that in case people are dealing with it in their yards and need a quick herbicide to use. So this is the hack and squirt technique. I just thought it'd be worth showing, and hopefully you can hear the video. It's short, but I will turn my volume up and play it for you. There's no talking quite yet.
So each hatchet mark is made into the cambium of the tree, and then you leave about an inch, inch and a half between each hatchet mark when you're making a pocket in order to catch the herbicide. And this tree is large enough that we're going to do the base, and the back side of the tree will go up and do the higher branches of the tree here.
So this is to make a deeper pocket to hold a bigger dose of herbicide.
Because it's such a big tree, we trying to trap as much herbicide as possible.
right, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. It's totally doable. It takes a little bit of practice, I would say, getting the angle of the hatchet right. It's, 45 to 60 degrees approximately that you hold the hatchet at. And some people have modified hatchets to make it so that it's pretty easy to make the notch in the tree. Trying to get, like I said, to the cambium layer where that's where it sends all of its energy down to the roots during the summer and fall. And that's then it will send the herbicide down to the roots as well. So another treatment option is basal bark application, where you can apply this more year round, which is a nice thing. And it's best to apply on a smaller tree, 6-inch diameter approximately. And you use the lower part of the trunk and just cover it, 1.5 feet down to the base of the tree. And that is, you need an oil soluble triclopyr product. So some cultural and biological control methods that are not great, but you can shade out seedlings with desired plants. So again, planting favorable plant trees. And unfortunately, at this point, there are no biological controls that are approved in Washington state, but I know lots of people are doing research, so hopefully something comes up besides just having herbicides as our only option. Let's see, wondering timing wise how we're doing.
About 5 minutes left.
All right, thank you. So for the treated sites, I will say we did see quite a bit of sprouting this year from the treatments last year. And that's what everybody says, especially with the larger trees, you're going to need to put in years, it's hard to say exactly how many years, but you're going to need to be persistent with treating these trees. They are very, very persistent, and it is hard to know exactly how long it's going to take. That's, what we're going to be monitoring. Treatment sites do show results within 1 to 2 weeks, where, like you can see in this picture, the leaves start turning brown and wilting, and that's just a way to know, okay, we were effective. And like I said, you just have to monitor every year. And with the smaller trees, you're going to have much better luck. The larger trees, you're going to have to monitor and stay on top of the treatments. We've waited to remove the trees that we treated last year because most of them weren't entirely dead. They'd still have live branches. I think that's the approach we've taken. We're just not removing the tree right off the bat because I don't want to cause more sprouting. And then depending on funding, we're hoping to do some native species planting in place of the tree of heaven down the road. So wanted to say thank you to our partners again. We could not have done this program without the help of the cities, both Bingen and White Salmon, Skamania County and Klickitat County. And then of course, like I said, the volunteer from Vancouver, Jeff Kusnick. I thank you so much for all of the help, and all of the funding that we've had as well has been, of course, hugely important. So thank you to everyone. And then this is my contact information and UCD, or Underwood Conservation District's contact information. So please feel free to reach out with questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. And I can answer more now, and if there's time, there's just a short video after this, but no, that can be last. So.
All right, thank you so much, Corrie. We only have just about a minute left before the next presentation, but there are 2 questions that ask about your grant funding sources for your Tree of Heaven control project. So where did the funding come from, they're wondering?
Yeah, so we had WSDA, Columbia Gorge Cooperative Weed Management, and DNR have been the primary sources so far. So.
All right. Did you look at cutting trees down, then treating the stump immediately to reduce spray drift?
experts, that is PSU, have said that cutting the tree is just not the best option. Of course, there's some hazard trees that you do have to potentially cut. And then, yes, painting the stump is an option. It's just not the best option. It's, as far as the research is showing, it typically, you'll see lots of sprouting still. I think there's a little bit of mixed reviews on that, but from what I'm reading and what I'm hearing from most other people, it's yeah, not the best option unless it's a hazard tree.
Thank you. Let's see. So there are a few more questions, you know, if you're able to just type them into the Q&A so that we can move to the next presentation.
No problem.
Yes, and the video, everyone, the video is on the homepage on the Underwood Conservation District, and you will receive that link in the list of resources that I send out. So please visit and watch the video, and oh yeah, and it's right there on the screen as well.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you so much, Corrie. All right. Let's see, perfect. Okay, so we have a running theme this morning, Don't Move Firewood, and now I'm super excited to introduce Laurel Downs from the Nature Conservancy to talk about the Don't Move Firewood campaign, outreach resources, and where Washington stands.
Thank you. Can you see the presentation okay?
Yes, it looks perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And my name is Laurel Downs, as Maria just said, and I work with the Nature Conservancy on the Don't Move Firewood campaign. And I have seen a lot of our resources today already, and so that makes me so happy to see. I will be talking about our campaign as a whole, and I'm just going to pre-apologize for all the time I clear my throat. I'm getting over being sick, and I feel like I'm extra nasally. I'm already nasally to begin with, so just sorry about that. But anyway, I will be talking about our campaign as a whole and our resources and services and all the ways that we raise awareness on the firewood pathway and kind of how you can get involved and, you know, slow the spread via that pathway. So I will move on. There we go. As many, if not all of you are well aware, firewood is a prominent vector for the spread of invasive species and other forest pests. Unfortunately, regulations are neither comprehensive nor are they consistent across the United States. And we do see new pop-ups and infestations every single year. And so those two facts right there combined kind of make the outreach environment very context dependent and complicated and confusing, to say the least. And so our campaign seeks to simplify that and give some best practice recommendations as well as specifics, basically all of the above, so that people can, you know, reach out to us and take from us what they need for their specific geographies and situations. Our overarching goal is simply to protect trees and reduce the risk of forest health. We do that by trying to slow the spread of invasive forest pests, specifically on the firewood pathway. We know that these critters get around other ways, and we just focus on the firewood pathway. And that's because the firewood pathway specifically is something that much of the public can actually have an impact with and make a difference and modify their behavior in a way that reduces risks to our trees. So the firewood using public is a huge target of ours. And about 50% of the public are self-described firewood users. So that's a lot of people using firewood. Also, stakeholder group educators are a target audience of ours as well. And I know a lot of people on this call today are in that group. So we target you as well, so you can use our resources and learn from our experiences and get effective outreach materials and strategies. The overall big message is don't move firewood, right? But we try to couple that with a positive action-oriented message. And that depends on, again, on the situation and the geography. So a lot of times that's buy it where you burn it. It's pretty straightforward. Sometimes it can be gather on site if that's in an area where that's responsible and permitted. Or it could even be buy certified heat treated firewood if you're in an area where that's readily available. So again, even even the messages that are coupled with the Don't Move Firewood kind of depend on where you are. All of our material can be found on our website. That's don'tmovefirewood.org. This is very in-depth, and it has a lot of great content, again, for both regular firewood users from the public, as well as forest health professionals. So we have a resource library with like 300 some items, and things can be taken right out of that and used for outreach purposes. We have a firewood map where we take a lot of esoteric language, technical information, regulatory information, and break it down into practical, succinct layperson language. And that's a really great resource for, again, the general public. And so you can click on any province or state and find out the regulatory situation there, forest pests of concern, any outreach materials that we found from, agencies or tribal entities, regional partners within that area. Really anything that we found relevant to that state or province, we try to keep on that page. And this is something that we try to update every single year and keep as accurate as possible. And on these calls, I always like to remind people that if you see something on one of these pages that's out of date, or a broken link or something like that, please reach out to me, because that's something I really try to keep on top of. We also have information on the forest pests themselves. We have a news site. We have 10 of our most popular web pages translated into Spanish. Super helpful for places with a lot of Spanish speakers. And then we have a lot of resources, again, specific to professionals in the realm of forest health. One of them, probably the latest and greatest, would be the Firewood Comparison Report. And this was a very in-depth look at the regulatory environment and the outreach environment as it relates to firewood across all 50 states and territories. It's really a deep dive into that. And it was kind of inspired and born out of the federal deregulation of emerald ash borer a couple of years ago. That kind of disheveled the whole regulatory environment in the United States. And it left a lot of states, especially in the West, Washington being one of them, open to, I want to say, a little bit of vulnerability, at least legal wise, for potentially infested ash material being moved from areas with emerald ash borer into areas without emerald ash borer, again, because that domestic quarantine was rescinded. So a lot of states do have their own state-based quarantines on emerald ash borer that prevents that legal movement. But a lot of places do not, and Washington is one of them. But this report doesn't just focus on emerald ash borer. Literally any regulation under which firewood is a regulated article is part of this report. It's kind of a one-stop shop for anything firewood related, as far as regulations. Even we looked into the firewood industry and certification ability of states. And then being an outreach campaign, we really focus on outreach status. So this is an excellent resource. The link is right in this page. I will make this available to Maria so she can send it out, and it's also on our webpage under the news tab. So one thing I really want to emphasize when it comes to outreach is the importance of getting that message across to folks before they leave their home. So a lot of times people think of firewood outreach as something that needs to be at parks themselves, and that's great, and it's important to have firewood outreach there, but sometimes that's too late. So you want to reach people in that decision-making process about their trip, which is at their house. So you don't want someone from Michigan deciding they're going to go on an RV trip and save some money or something and pack their emerald ash borer infested ash hardwood in that and then travel to Washington. That's what we want to avoid, right? So they need to know about that pathway, and they need to make arrangements for their trip ahead of time with that knowledge in mind. So the best way to accomplish that is to have a very comprehensive online outreach environment. And for this report, we looked at all the state agencies for every state, looking for firewood communication. We looked at cooperative extensions. We took a fine-tooth comb to state parks and even the reservation process, because a lot of state parks and federal parks actually use a third-party reservation system. So having consistent outreach across all these metrics, and especially those places between the state parks themselves and the reservation process, is very important. And this is the sort of thing that we love to see. So we're looking for eye-catching, very succinct, and just kind of jump out at you outreach, quite frankly. This is great stuff. Consistency, repetition, ubiquity, that's your best friend when it comes to firewood outreach, because a lot of times people aren't actively looking for this information. They're looking for information on their campsite, if they can bring their dog, how much things cost. And so, you know, our campaign over the last decade has done a great job in increasing awareness among the public on the firewood pathway, but there's a long way to go as well. And a lot of people aren't aware of it. And so they're not looking for this information. So having it in any appropriate online space that makes sense at all, pretty much, it's ideal to have this information. So again, people who aren't looking for it will come across it. And when it comes to the outreach itself, what some of our research has found is that call to action wording is really effective. So not only, again, just telling people what not to do, but giving them very clear instructions of the best thing to do depending on, you know, the situation at hand. So again, the state you're in, the parks, the rules, whether or not they're regulations, all that stuff in mind. You know, bullet points, one lines, you know, do this instructions is really effective. When we looked at all the states, we found that a big takeaway was there's an overall need for more consistency, not only on the regulation front, but on the outreach front. And that's our cup of tea. So that's what we're going to focus on here. States overall do a pretty good job of having some sort of highly visible, appropriate firewood communications on at least one state agency webpage. And that's great. And that's actually usually the State Department of Agriculture. And that makes sense if you think about it, because a lot of times that is the agency behind any sort of legislation under which firewood is a regulated article. And so a lot of times that information will be available there. When you think about your typical firewood user, however, it's not likely that they're going to be going to the State Department of Agriculture before their camping trip. They're going to be looking at other resources, or if you're talking about landowners or anything like that. So other places that are really important to have this information, again, cooperative extension, state parks, that reservation process. And anytime you see that orange color, that means firewood information is, it exists, we found it, but it's not necessarily eye-catching or jumping out or likely to get across to someone who, again, isn't specifically looking for firewood information. So that's what that means. As far as Washington specifically, our report found does have some things going for it. So the partial exterior quarantine due to the land border with Canada, that's that international federal regulation that protects Washington from potentially infested firewood coming into the country. Any firewood coming from Canada has to be heat treated to legally enter. State agency official firewood recommendations were found and highly visible and amazing, quite frankly, on the Invasive Species Council webpage from the Recreation and Conservation Office. So this is great. We highly recommend that, you know, other agencies or anyone in Washington looking to up their online outreach game, look to those sort of resources because they're already attuned to Washington specifically. So you know, of course, always welcome to use our resources, and we have a Washington page, but you have your own resources right there, which is great. Firewood movement related recommendations on state parks campsite reservation portal. We did find a line about using local firewood. It was buried a little bit in the frequently asked questions of the reservation portal for state parks. It was not in the frequently asked questions for the state parks. So again, like, it's amazing how many places you can find similar information and it'll be different. And that's one of the things we look for. Extension recommendations. We found a link for Don't Move Firewood on the invasive species page. So that's great. Again, with these low visibility findings, you know, we're happy to see it. We don't want anyone to be discouraged with the just the orange check rating, you know, it is important that it's there and it's good. It just can be improved on a little bit. That's all. As far as what's not currently present in Washington, there are no exterior quarantines on firewood itself. There are no exterior quarantines on invasive species or pests under which firewood is a regulated article. So again, being opened up to that possibility, especially with the federal deregulation of emerald ash borer. There are no interior pest-based quarantines limiting interstate firewood movement. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not a necessary thing right now. That's just another metric that we look at. State lands or park-specific regulations or official statewide firewood policies or restrictions, that does not exist in Washington. And there are no state lands or parks recommendations on the relevant pages that we found, at least. So on pages like the reservation pages or frequently asked question pages, that is a opportunity for improvement there. And even again, without regulations, I know that's something that's much more complicated and hard to change, but again, that best practice recommendations and outreach is something that's relatively easy to do and doesn't need regulations for. And then certification ability. So thinking about the firewood industry, a lot of states have their own state-based ability to certify firewood. Washington just isn't one of them. So if there's any firewood producers in Washington that want to ship their firewood out of state into a state that does have a quarantine affecting firewood movement, they would not be able to do so. And then looking at pests that we know move on the firewood pathway that are already in Washington. We know of mountain pine beetle, thousand cankers disease. But again, what we're really worried about for Washington would be those pests that aren't in Washington yet. And a lot of folks today talking about all the preparations being made for that. So emerald ash borer, spotted lanternfly. Sometimes it's more about the pests that aren't there yet that we're thinking about. This is kind of just another look about what I've already talked about. This is just looking at Western states here and the different metrics for outreach. So Washington's not alone. A lot of the Western states have room for improvement. And part of my job after this report, which we're now on like the 4th version of because things are constantly changing, is to find the areas for opportunity for improvement and reach out to those entities and give them suggested messaging and wording and anything else we can do to make your life easier, basically, to amplify that messaging and improve that outreach. And just a caveat with this is a newer version that's not published yet because I noticed a mistake while doing this presentation and I fixed it. And so it'll be reflected on the next version that we do. So these are all of the agencies and other places and entities in Washington that I would hope to see really strong firewood communications and outreach. Again, we can't necessarily predict where the public's going to be going, but we can kind of think about any appropriate location where firewood communications would make sense. And each of these has something that would make sense to have firewood communications. When I first started doing this presentation, just out of creature habit and the fact that we've done this for a few other states, is I've gone through each of these and pulled screenshots and showed what you had and what you didn't have and was giving example messaging. And then I reached out to Maria and I was like, who's going to be at this call? Because I don't want to bore everyone to death or go into way too much detail if not necessary. So I kind of scrapped that a little bit, but if there's anyone here from Washington from any of these agencies that's interested in that information, I have a lot of it already, and I'm happy to go through that with you and just make your life easier in terms of outreach. But I do want to kind of focus a little bit on some of the awesome outreach that we did find. So again, kudos to the Invasive Species Council in Washington. They have an entire page dedicated to the Buy It Where You Burn It campaign. Already, you know, using that action wording, a lot of very specific, great best practice information for Washington specifically. This is an awesome resource for anyone in Washington. We highly recommend that you pull from this. And they even went so far as to put messaging on other pages, like pages about the invasive species themselves. So again, thinking about any place that it makes sense that people should find this information, even if they're not specifically looking for it. Another place that is important to have at least thought of some ideas about firewood communications is fire safety pages, fire restriction pages, burn bans. I know that that's a totally separate topic in a lot of ways, but let me convince you why it's important. So sometimes people will bring firewood from faraway places and then they are not even able to burn it because of a burn ban. So as far as the online, trying to prevent that action to begin with, good place to have it is people looking for that information. Again, not thinking about firewood specifically, but thinking, can I even have a fire here? Let me find out. Oh, and then they can read about the firewood pathway. But as far as if they have brought firewood and they can't burn it, that's a problem, because we know the longer this firewood can sit out, the greater potential it has for any invasive species within to emerge and cause problems for the nearby forests. So having a plan for that, providing a safe option for when that is the case, is something that, authorities over these campgrounds and everything should definitely consider. And so I thought, I would just include that as pretty important to think about. Cities. So cities sometimes struggle with where in their online locations that they can have this information that it makes sense. Some obvious places that a lot of cities don't have would be grills and fire pits. Seattle just happens to be one that does have that, and they already have some instructions about firewood. So adding a line in there about the firewood pathway and being responsible with that is a great location. But also a lot of cities do have information on urban forestry and community forestry and tree care and all of that. And sometimes they even have, a lot about the information that was talked about today, what to plant, what not to plant, invasive species. Again, it's a pretty appropriate location to have information on the firewood pathway of spread. And you can even think about it in terms of those people who did some traveling. Maybe they brought that firewood home if they didn't use it all, and they're sticking it in their backyard, or they're giving it to a neighbor or someone they know who heats their home with firewood, just not knowing that it could potentially have invasive species involved. So these are, again, just appropriate places to have firewood communications. And then also one that a lot of people don't think of, but is another appropriate place, would be municipal organic compost and waste, and anything related to that. So Seattle, Olympia, other cities have these awesome tools that people can look up to see what to do with their woody debris and stuff like that. Does not hurt to throw in a line or a couple words about the firewood pathway and being responsible about firewood disposal. Something that I found out too is that Oregon is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, distributor of Christmas trees. Christmas trees can have their own pests. So a lot of Christmas trees coming from out of state into Washington can introduce its own problems. But interestingly enough, a lot of people associate in their mind Christmas trees with firewood. And so, folks struggling on where to put this sort of information, including it in any sort of information about Christmas tree disposal, is another honestly great place to do so. And then we actually even have in our resource library and our website information about holiday greenery and smart ways of disposing that for the safety of urban forests and people's trees. So just something to think about. So this is an example of some of our graphics. So we create our own graphics that are pretty generic. Again, you're more than welcome to use them. These are meant to be shared for anyone in the United States who needs them. We also do customized graphics for partners. So anyone who's looking to get specific wording about maybe a specific regulation or situation in their state or park or anything like that, we can certainly work with you and add that to a graphic. We can change things like the background, make it look specific to an area. We can change the pest of focus, anything like that. Your logos, your QR codes. We're happy to customize these graphics for you. That is a free service that we provide. The only associated cost that could come up with this is if you wanted to have physical printouts. You would be in charge of printing that out. But as far as design and everything else, that is something that we do. So if you're ever interested in that or could use some customized graphics, please reach out to me or my supervisor, Lee Greenwood, and we'd be happy to work with you to get something made up. And I know I talked pretty fast, so I hope I left some room for questions, but there's my contact information right there. Pretty much my entire job is firewood and the firewood pathway. So if you need anything, or like I said, see anything that needs to be changed on any of our resources, and I see my supervisor, Lee Greenwood, is here as well, and she can answer questions. And so thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurel. That was awesome. Gave me a lot to think about, and hopefully everyone here from the cities a lot to think about as well. You have a couple questions. The first one, I'm not sure if you'll know, but do you know why the emerald ash borer domestic quarantine was ended by USDA?
That's a good question for Lee. Lee, if you want to take that.
You know, this is a really complex question. There are many reasons why it was ended. The way that it's usually phrased is that it no longer served its purpose very well. So basically, the federal quarantine itself had covered such a huge amount of space, and the emerald ash borer had slowly but steadily expanded its range, so that the quarantine itself no longer basically had a great impact. Now, that is a really tough message for Oregon, Washington, and California, because you may be able to think to yourself, well, but it still had an impact on the movement of materials from the eastern United States to the western United States, and that's what matters in Washington, Oregon, and California. And that is sort of just a really difficult calculation that maybe isn't the right conversation for today. But what's important to think about is state-based regulations have such a strong role here. So if Washington wanted to sort of pick up its level of protection from emerald ash borer in light of the fact that the emerald ash borer domestic federal quarantine was lifted, your state could opt to put in place firmer state-based regulations in order to attempt to create that level of protection that perhaps you would find desirable. It's a really, really tricky long-term question that comes into play with a lot of different federal and state opinions in science. So.
Thank you. The next two questions are very similar, so I'll just combine them. Do you work with companies such as Camping World, Good Sam, Thousand Trails, Cruise America, REI, et cetera, outdoor-oriented companies to get signage displayed?
We absolutely work with a wide variety of them from a digital perspective. So we do advertising with some of these types of groups in different ways, but physical paper outreach materials and signage would be the responsibility of local partners. So for instance, if you wanted them in REIs, that would be possibly like a Washington DNR responsibility. We would be delighted to design that for you for putting up in REI information booths, but we don't have the capacity nor really the proper local connections to put up those pieces of paper. So that's a good example of sort of like where our jurisdiction starts and ends, and then the local partners' jurisdiction begins.
Excellent, thanks. And the last question, what distance can wood be transported from on multiple location trips?
Yeah, that's such a hard question, because the reality is that a lot of us make like a big circle when we camp, right? You go to this campground and the next campground, the next campground. It's both very easy and very difficult to answer. If you lived in Forest Grove, Oregon, the answer would be 0 miles, because right now there's an emerald ash borer infestation there. And so no level of wood movement would be appropriate. However, if you live, if you're going camping in one national forest in, central Washington, and you're going to another national forest in central Washington, the actual functional risk of moving firewood 50 miles between those two national forests would be fairly low. but you would want to use up your firewood at each destination and then buy or gather new firewood, because it's the distance that matters. So if you're hopscotching along with the same bunch of firewood, you're going 50, 100, 150, et cetera, et cetera. It's getting farther and farther. It's getting more and more likely to transport a pest that wouldn't otherwise have been transported. But there's also definitely the like, know your zone, right? So in the event that spotted lanternfly establishes an infestation in Washington state, no level of firewood movement would be appropriate there at all, because it would have such a high chance of moving that forest pest.
Okay. That makes sense. All right, thank you. I think those are all your questions. Everyone please visit the chat. Daria just put a link to a YouTube video where you can learn more about the federal emerald ash borer deregulation. And that is it for today. But before you go, there's a couple things. Let's see, I want to launch the post-summit poll for today, which should be showing up on your screen. These are the same questions you saw at the beginning, but now rate your knowledge now that you've seen all the presentation. All right, couple more seconds. All right. Good participation. Thank you, everyone. Before we talk about the CEUs, I did want to say thank you to all of our speakers today. They volunteered their time to be here and to educate us. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And there's one more question. Oh, yes, everyone's saying thank you. And a reminder that tomorrow is the same Zoom link that you used today. So click that same Zoom link to log back in tomorrow. Now I'm going to drop in the chat the survey form for you to fill out to get continuing education units from either ISA or SAF. And if you are not seeking those recertification credits, please fill out the form anyway, at least the top part. It's also doubling as like an evaluation, so you can provide your feedback, and we would greatly appreciate that. And let's see, I believe that's everything. So thank you so much for attending. I really hope that you learned a lot, feel inspired to talk with your colleagues and your friends and your family about this information. And we really hope to see you again tomorrow.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah.